They were enablers.
They're sucking money out of this country.
President Biden is calling China a, quote, ticking time bomb. This after Biden signed an executive order which narrowly limited U.S. technology investments in China.
It's a framework that will create millions of jobs, grow the economy, invest in our nation. It's clear to me that we're going to have to probably break it up.
And I cannot vote to continue with this piece of legislation. I just can't.
You're done.
Build Back Better is dead.
Andy, we know the Chinese are famous for trying to steal technology.
We're on the edge of war, which means that Xi Jinping is thinking of using or threatening nuclear weapons in the not-too-distant future.
China has been infiltrating America. They have started and been planning war with us for years.
China's been killing somewhere between 65 to 70,000 Americans a year with doses of illegal Chinese fentanyl.
They don't see us as a competitor, they see us as an enemy. This is the biggest threat we've had since Pearl Harbor.
Is the economy in China in danger of a serious, ongoing downward spiral?
It's bad shape for China right now, and geopolitically, it's getting a lot tougher.
Now, China's Communist Party it seems to me that they've got a deal to stay in power. The Chinese Communist Party maintains political power and says, okay, you give us political power, you keep us as the government, and you, the people, you can be prosperous.
But it's always been kind of a Faustian bargain, right? A deal with the devil. And like all deals with the devil changes the terms.
Well, a little bit of insanity to start off tonight's show. Welcome, everybody. My name is Alex from Reporterfy Media. I got Brian Berletic here from the new Atlas. And, of course, Angelo is live in his studio, ready to rock and roll tonight. Welcome back, everyone. It's going to be a firecracker of a week here as we got upcoming elections in the Donetsk People's Republic as well. I'm going to hand the panel over to Brian. Brian, let's get the latest here on Russia. What's going on here in the latest conflict?
Okay, so what I've been following at least has been the ongoing Ukrainian offensive. And on the 4th of this month, that was officially 3 full months of fighting. Ukraine's offensive has been ongoing for 3 months. And as we look across the Western headlines, they're all more or less admitting that they've hardly made any progress at all. They were fighting over the town of Robotyno, and they have been said to have taken it, but then not really. And then when you actually read through the Western media articles, they don't really seem very confident in these claims that they've taken this town or tiny village of 400 people before the conflict started. Months before the offensive was launched, all of these gray zone were all evacuated by both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. And so having only reached this town, not even reaching the first of Russia's several main defense lines at the 3-month mark, and having lost as much as they have lost, including now Challenger 2 tank, that was now confirmed, destroyed over the last 24 hours. So it's going very badly for Ukraine, and even the Western media is no longer able to spin this anymore. So I think that's where we are right now. We're at a juncture where the West has to decide, are we going to continue on this path where Ukraine will inevitably fail, or do we pull back, or do we intervene in one way or another? It's a very critical juncture at this point.
Angelo, do you want to add to that?
I think it's pretty much clear. When it comes to the Russian side, I have the impression that Russia has Ukrainian troops where Russia wants them to be. So the idea for Russia, because it's a war of attrition, it's just for Russia, they have very heavily fortified lines, and they're on the defensive. Plus, in terms of artillery, they have superiority. They have also air superiority. So they can just let them come, and that's very sad for Ukraine. But they're playing in the hands of Russians, and just the Russians are just waiting. And the ratio of deaths on the Ukrainian side compared to the Russian side, it's the estimate is between 7 to 10 to 1 against 1. So that's butchery, sadly.
Yeah, heavy casualties. We're starting to get a hint out of it. Of some of the mainstream media has been talking about it over the last couple of weeks, kind of hinting along how many people that they feel potentially died. We're not even talking injured. And I really think, gentlemen, I'm going to gear this up a little bit and try to predict. I know you guys don't really want to make predictions, but I think that unless we see some progress here from Ukraine over the next couple of weeks, heading into October, I feel that it's quite easy for some of these NATO countries to potentially get involved in this. We've been seeing some headlines coming out of Belarus. We've been seeing some flirting around with the Kaliningrad by the Lithuanians. We've heard of, Moldova being very unstable. Their government is basically on the rocks there. And this is not really working in the order of Ukraine that presumably is supposed to be making progress in this region, but haven't. I have a slide that I just want to pull up here, and this should get the audience a little bit interested in where this is playing out and how this is playing out. Brian has done a lot of coverage on a lot of the weaponry that has been brought into these countries. But if we have a look at here, this is a little bit, not too old, but a few months old here, but it just shows how much artillery that, they've burned through. 8,500 javelins, 1 million units of 155 millimeter howitzers, France, military aid, Germany, 14 Leopard 2 tanks, the Netherlands, Poland, Estonia. Little Estonia pumping 370 million euros. And matched by Latvia and, of course, Lithuania. That's $1 billion for those small Baltic countries who, in fact, crazy enough that this is going on, that have a population of over 20% ethnic Russians there. Guys, are we sitting on a powder keg that could happen here very quickly? Can some of these other countries easily get involved?
Angelo, okay, I'll go first.
And then we'll follow up by Angela.
Well, yeah, I think, and I've said this all along, that there is a possibility that NATO could intervene directly. They could do it through a sort of coalition of the willing. It could be the US or Poland or the Baltic nations or a combination of these countries. And they could do it in a very similar way to the way they did it in Syria, where they set up a buffer zone and they managed their intervention in a way that avoided direct conflict with Russian troops in Syria. And they may do a very similar thing in Ukraine. But how exactly is this going to change things in their favor? Would it? And again, there's this huge risk, just like there was in Syria. Nothing major has happened in Syria yet, but it always could have. There was always that fear that it could happen, that things could escalate out of control. And the same goes for Ukraine. The stakes for Russia in Ukraine are so much higher than in Syria, although it's all connected, because if the US were to succeed in Syria, that would be one ally off the board, and Russia being that much more isolated globally, allowing the US and its allies to continue encircling and containing. So it's very dangerous. A NATO intervention in Ukraine is very dangerous. But then what else could NATO do to change what is happening? Because Ukraine is very clearly and decisively losing at this point.
Well, thanks for that, Brian. I just want to tell everyone, if you're just joining us now, all the links to all these gentlemen's channels are in the descriptions below. We've also brought Angelo's audience into the program tonight, so welcome aboard, everyone. And don't forget to subscribe to these channels. We greatly appreciate your support. Over to you, Angelo, on this.
I think, I don't know, Brian maybe can give me more information on that. In Syria, there's no direct confrontation between Russia and the US. If there are NATO troops in Ukraine, that's the difference with Syria, is that there would be direct confrontation. I think the gloves would be completely off if the NATO troops go into Ukraine, and I think they will not be as kind, because you see the Russian army have been very careful just to limit. This is still a special military operation. Once you get NATO troops inside Ukraine, that's war. That's another stage. It's completely. I think loss would be completely off. But then I think when it comes to NATO countries, I don't see many NATO countries joining in. I would say maybe Baltic states and Poland, but those are, keep in mind that those countries are not probably not even sovereign state, just obeying. You have puppets that have been pre-selected by the US, and they're just all obeying. And in some ways they can be even more radicals, because it's when you look at how Poland is behaving, it's interesting. It makes me think about kids. Have you seen those kids sometimes? When you were younger, you had this small kid. He had a big brother on the back, and he was actually bullying bigger kids than him. But he was like, you know what? I get my big brother there, and the little kid was very, very nasty. Well, that is how the Chihuahua states, Baltic states, are doing in Poland. They are so aggressive, and not only with Russia. Look at the Baltic states, how they're behaving with China, very aggressive. But just because they got Big Brother on the back. But think about it: Big Brother will not always be there, and if Big Brother one day is gone, they will be very lonely. And keep in mind who's at the border. Who was their main partner. They will be very isolated up there, up north. So I think it's just madness the way they're behaving.
Yeah, I know we focus a lot on these countries there, although they have a small population. But we have territories there that in some of these areas. For example, Moldova, right between Moldova and Ukraine, we have Transnistria that has never been resolved. Surprisingly, Europe has never wanted to resolve it. They've just left it as an unrecognized country of Transnistria. Now there's 600,000 people there, and it does have some a little bit of a military presence in that region. But also, and then as you crawl up towards the Baltics, you have this part of Russia that is connected to Lithuania. You got the Estonians that are so close to the border. But here's something I wanted to bring up to you guys, and I want your opinion on this, and I value it. I was reading in the newspaper the other morning a very sad story of a 22-year-old United Kingdom, born and raised in the UK, decided to leave. And the way they told this story, it was and my heart goes out to his family. And of course, the loss is tremendous. But the way this story was written, I read it twice and I said, wait a minute, 22 years old, went to Ukraine, fought, died in action, and was not how years ago, the United Kingdom banned people that went to want to support or go support and fight for their country, whether it was in the Middle East or whatever. They brought them back. They actually stripped them of their nationality. And here we are, a 22-year-old. How does a 22-year-old college student from the United Kingdom get on an airplane, get to the Ukraine, end up on the front line, making why and how, Brian? I mean, and Angelo, what are 22-year-old Europeans getting on airplane? Who is recruiting these people? Who's convincing these people? Because I'll tell you right now, I mean, it has to be pretty convincing to get somebody on an airplane that is, 2 or 3 years away from finishing college, getting university. And they talked about, a bright kid, smart kid. Really? If you're that smart, what are you doing on an airplane going to the front line in the Ukraine? I mean, as Angelo said, 10-1. It's not good odds. I mean, this is ludicrous. And the UK government seems to have no problem with this. But when somebody wants to go to defend their country in the Middle East, they're terrorists. So, gentlemen, how do we view that? What the hell are these kids doing getting on airplanes going to the Ukraine?
But it's not the first time. It's not the first time. They did it with Syria. All government in Europe, they close an eye on all those Europeans that went to join ISIS in Syria. And actually, France made a very bad experience, because some of them, they went to Syria and then they came back to France. And then that's when you had terrorist attacks in France. So I think this is not the first time, and they're closing an eye on this. And I think we need to be extremely careful. We don't mention much this, but what we have created in Ukraine is the equivalent of ISIS. This movement, we have normalized the neo-Nazi movement, and those ones are the real deal. Again, those are not because we have them all around the world. It's a look, it's an ideology, but what you have in Ukraine are the real deal. Those guys are willing to die for their ideology. And what happened, because we have normalized that, I think this will create a long-term problem in Europe. It's the equivalent of ISIS, as nasty as them. And I think this is only the beginning. And I don't want to imagine if those Ukrainian neo-Nazis, they were to be dropped completely by the West, if they might turn against the West. Because keep in mind, remember bin Laden was US ally, and bin Laden turned against the US. Well, this could happen with all those Ukro-Nazis that we have created in Ukraine. And keep in mind, this project of Nazi project has decades. It's actually they left like some minorities there after World War II, and they kept financing them through the CIA. Secret services, European secret services. For them, the war actually was never stopped. They kept on. It was because for them to win the World War II was not only to annihilate the Germans. Ideally, they wanted to do with one stone to kill two birds, to have to also get the USSR. So we have created this problem, Nazi problem, and I think this will backfire.
Brian.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't even thinking about that, but there are actually people across the West who are radicalized, racist, white supremacists who are attracted to the Nazism rampant and almost openly supported by the West in Ukraine. It's very strange because they're supposedly against it, but they're also arming and funding and encouraging it all at the same time. But this person that you're referring to, Alex, sounded more like an ordinary person who was brainwashed by the Western media. And we remember when the special military operation first began, how powerful that wave of propaganda was. And we saw people all over signing up, volunteering to go to Ukraine and to go fight. And they had this romanticized fantasy in their head about what it would be like. And then one by one, they started actually making contact with Russian forces. A lot of these guys who had fought in Afghanistan and Iraq previously, realizing, no, this is not the United States military dropping bombs on people in sandals with 40-year-old rifles. This is the Russian Federation. They will kill us before we even see them. And then they started leaving. And I still think that there are people who are still following the absolute worst sources of information online, and they are out of touch with the reality. And we see them every day on Twitter, for example. These people, like, for instance, when the Challenger 2 was destroyed, the way that they tried to spin it so that it seems like it's not a big deal, or it didn't even really happen, or somehow it destroyed all the Russians in the area and then it was taken out somehow. I mean, like, there's people who follow those type of commentators who are out of touch with the reality. If you're out of touch with the reality, you're going to make bad decisions. You don't have information available to make the right decisions. When people say ignorance can kill you, I mean, that is quite literal, especially in this case with this conflict.
I wanted to bring this other subject up. Well, that we're talking about, the average person. I received an email the other day with someone telling me a story that there's a lot of recruiting going on in Europe, but a lot of it is done by females that have left the Ukraine that are recruiting males to help assist or fight for the country, or actually engage in relationships and then provoke or to persuade them to actually fight. Do you think there's any merit to something like that? Is that a strategy that a country would do? I know it could be completely off the wall here, but the email was quite detailed and on their techniques. I mean, is this fabrication or?
If they're doing something like that, I think it's beyond desperate. And I mean, we cannot confirm that. We have no idea if that's actually happening. I've seen no evidence that that is happening, but we do see the Ukrainian military drawing in all sorts of people who are not even qualified for military service, whether it's they have their physical limitations, their age, their occupation. They're drawing all of these people in now to plug the gaps in their manpower because they are losing catastrophically. This offensive has been a complete disaster, and it's not going to get better from here. You don't lose your army and all of your equipment and then start making more progress. It's exactly the opposite. You start to lose worse and worse. Things start to snowball and compound, and so that they will become desperate. But none of this is going. If what they were doing before didn't work, more conventional means of waging war, these unconventional, desperate measures to fill gaps and to make up for their shortcomings, this is not going to work at all.
You know, there's quite an explosive report. I sent it to Alexander Christoforu about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, about the BBC talking about the recruitment drive in the Ukraine and the tactics that they were using to recruit these people, and also out of country, trying to get some of the men that have left the country back into the country to fight. Like you said, Brian, when you start to hear these stories, and especially, you know, of course, we can take what the BBC says in a grain of salt, but it's like they're setting us up for something that, you know, they know a little bit, maybe potentially a little bit more about the numbers, the true numbers of how many of these soldiers have actually been, you know, thrown to the dogs and killed in action. It's incredible. We don't hear these reports or any accurate numbers. We've heard anything from 100,000 deaths to 500,000 deaths. I mean, the numbers all over the place. When I was talking to Patrick Lancaster about a week ago, he explained the territory. Even if everybody put their guns down tonight and stopped all the tanks, there's decades of cleanup work that has to be done before any of this land or territory can be inhabited from people anymore. I mean, yes, desperation is something that we can see, but I mean, as we start to grind down September and we get into October, gentlemen, I mean, is this going to be the winter that Europe regrets?
And Angelo, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know if those leaders, they even think there might be some changes, maybe regime change. We see some trends, new trends. People are starting to shift. They start realizing this is a war the West cannot win, and it's not a war for people. It's a war for the globalist elites. Then there's a cost. The cost is very interesting. People, they see $150 billion. The cost is far, far more. It's probably, I would make my estimates, and I'm going to explain how I do that. My estimate is probably between $10 to $20 trillion cost of war for, especially for Europe. Because if you think, well, not only are we sending weapons, but then there's reconstructions. There's going to be at least $1 trillion of reconstruction. If we admit Ukraine into Europe, the Ukraine is going to be a recipient of at least $20 billion every year because we need to compensate because the economy is so down. Then you have also the economies, what we are paying in terms of energy, the cost over a period, because we are decoupling from Russia. For the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to cost us, consumers, trillions of dollars because we are going to pay much more on electricity. And then there's economically, because, for example, most of Europe, and especially Germany, is going to deindustrialize. There's an impact. It's the cost. We are not going to see. It's not from today to tomorrow. It is going to last for 10, 20 years. So you see, there's and then I'm not even talking about the fact that we froze the funds, Russian funds, well, the euro and the dollar are going to have a huge impact because of that. Those two currencies will not be the global currencies we had before. So just de-dollarization is going to cost the collective West a lot of money. And what is interesting is that the one that was supposed to suffer the most has a positive GDP right now, while Europe is in recession. So it's important just to point out that the cost is way, way bigger. If Europeans knew about this cost, and I made a quick calculation, 10 to 20 trillions of dollars over a period of 20 years for European consumers, it amounts to $20,000 to $40,000 per person. So if Europeans knew that, they would just get mad, because Europeans are like, oh, but it's okay. I don't see it. Let's finance this war in Ukraine. Weapons, it's nothing. The cost of weapons, it's nothing. It's the impact, economical impact that we are going to regret, not only this generation but the next generation too, if we don't get back to Russia and make excuses and beg for mercy.
I know that you brought up the financial impact of these wars. I was looking over BlackRock recently here and did some research with BlackRock over the last couple of weeks. If you see how much money BlackRock has in the American economy, it has almost 10% of the U.S. economy on its balance sheets, into the trillions of dollars. And there was an interesting comment that I was reading. BlackRock makes a killing on killing. And they make a fortune on military hardware. But here's another interesting point: is if you look at this headline here, BlackRock and JP Morgan help set up Ukraine Reconstruction Bank. So here's a company that is financing a war or conflict, whatever you want to call it, and the country gets completely obliterated by some of BlackRock's top investments. Okay, some of them are Lockheed Martin, the other names, notable names in the killing business. But also, if you see that BlackRock, in one hand, they're investing in this artillery that blows the countries into smithereens, and then they look on the other side, but don't worry, we're here to invest to clean up the country. I mean, guys, I have a problem with that. and I have a problem with the way that we are portraying these countries like they're, peace. This entire NATO-backed Ukraine support. I mean, no one's holding these countries, for what they've been doing. I mean, if you're a person that's living in Hungary right now, if you're living in Italy right now, as Angelo says, it's going to hit you in the pocketbook somewhere. And it's going to bite. And that's why we're starting to see people extend their mortgages. They're wondering why the house of, their housing is going out of control. All these play a factor in the world economy. Interest rates, going up at 20, 30 year. I mean, this is going to be, a super boom for the economy here, I would say, unless this gets sorted out real fast, because you have categorically taken Russia out of the entire banking system. And they're never going to return to that, guys. It's not like Russia's going to be invited back to use the SWIFT banking system tomorrow if everybody puts the guns down. That's gone. Generations of companies that have gone to Russia, that relationship is gone. They're not going to trust these guys anymore. And can you imagine what kind of world we would live in? And some of the people might disagree with me on this, but what if we didn't have a company or country like Russia to push back against this NATO-led or NATO-supported, American-backed, collective-backed, defense? I mean, what if there was no Russia in this world right now? This is one guy that said, wait a minute, I'm willing to risk my economy. I'm willing to risk soldiers. I'm willing to get kicked out of the banking system. They stole all the money that's been sitting in the banks. All the Russian banks, they took it. I mean, it's just digits. It's gone. It'll never return. And when you see that type of play happen, how can anyone trust the United States of America, the same country that's indicted the president 4 times this year? I mean, the trust is gone. I'm sorry, but it's long gone. It's like sitting at a table, as you said, Angelo, sitting at a table with somebody and they're saying, hey, let's play a game of cards. And they're cheating, they're stacking the deck, they're stealing the poker chips. You're not going to go back and play cards with these guys anymore. These guys are gangsters. I'm sorry, but when you start pulling sanctions, 11 rounds of it, and start, taking Russia out of the banking system, cutting them off by Visa, MasterCard, American Express, of course these guys are going to shop around and look for other people to do business with. Though that relationship with Russia in Western economies and Europe is finished. And the more I look into it and the more I dig into it, you start seeing visa requests canceled for the average person that wants to even travel to Europe. Visa denied, can't come, can't do it. Here's something else I just want to tell the panel, and then I'll hand it back over to you guys. Does this panel and this audience understand that Russian YouTubers that had a career in YouTube were shut down overnight? Their channels immediately demonetized, even if they were a yoga channel, a dance channel, maybe a kids channel. They were immediately shut down overnight, stripped of their banking, and allowing them to get ad revenue from that. If it gets worse, maybe some of the people left the country. They say, okay, that's no problem. I still have my channel. I'll go and maybe I'll live in, I don't know, Georgia. Well, try walking into a bank with a Russian passport and getting a bank account. Pretty damn hard right now. So all those doors slam shut on all those content creators. And when you see the ties severed like that, there's no going back here. So this is, like I said, this is for all the marbles, this conflict. And like I said, and you guys said in the panel, I rather doubt if the West is going to give up just like that. I think they're going to bring more in. Anybody want to add to that? Thanks, guys, for allowing me to have that little rant, but I needed to get off my chest.
Well, I would say everything that you were just saying about the U.S. and Europe versus Russia, they're also doing against China. And what they thought they were going to do was encircle and contain both Russia and China and drag everyone else around the world with them along on this, to advance these geopolitical objectives. What is happening instead is that the West is finding themselves increasingly isolated. They're watching these measures that they take to hurt Russia and China, and they're backfiring. They're blowing up in their face. And we've talked about this many times in the past on this channel and elsewhere. The underlying fundamentals that are causing this, that are driving this, the people running the West do not have the background, the capability, the mindset necessary to actually administer a country, let alone this empire that they're trying to build. There's a disconnect between themselves and their ideology and their politics and how the real world actually works. So we're watching them come to grips in real time in this proxy war against Russia and Ukraine with the reality of military industrial output and how, you cannot just expand artillery shell production overnight. It's something that takes years to do. And it's not something you do by just investing money and expanding the factory, getting the contractors in there to expand the company. You have to find the human resources, which means you have to set up your education system to produce the human resources in the first place. And it's a huge process that the West has allowed to decay and rot and die over all of these years with all of their Ponzi schemes. Their schemes rather than actually running a constructive and productive economy. Now they're paying the price for all of that. And this dream of reasserting themselves globally is in shambles. And I think that's why countries like Russia and China and many others all around the globe, they see this, they want nothing to do with it, and they will fight back because they don't want to be dragged down the drain with the West.
I mean, Brian, I put a comment up on the screen. Is there any truth to that?
Culture genocide against Russia. Well, I mean, the West is attacking Russian culture, and they're they're uprooting it and erasing it across the West. They're not going to do that in Russia. Actually, Russia's culture is probably going to thrive because people see it under attack, and they're going to realize that it has value and that they should invest more heavily in it. They see it in danger, and that's when a lot of people wake up who are on the fence or who never really cared. They wake up and they understand the value of this, how important it is to invest in it. I've seen the same thing happen here in Thailand. I've seen the same thing happen in China. And so, they're trying. The West is trying, but I don't think that they're succeeding.
Before I go on to Angelo, I did talk with Cyrus Jansen, and he made an interesting comment to me on the phone the other day. He said he was in a golf, I guess a tea house or something like that. I haven't been golfing in years, so I don't even... Clubhouse, yes. And he was watching tennis, and on the screen, he noticed that the sports channel, it was a Russian name, but it was a blank white flag. They wouldn't even put the flag on the television of the nationality of the person playing. And he said to some of his guys, this is a bit crazy. Why wouldn't they put the flag? And he said immediately some of the guys turned around at them and said, well, what are you talking about? She's Russian, right? And he says, wait a minute. And he had said to me, that was a time where he said, wow, like really, some of these people are just so indoctrinated by the media that they just cannot even see past how ludicrous it is to imagine that you try to represent your country. And I think there is some truth to that comment that I put on the screen here. These are people that are being the average person of the country being told they can't travel. I mean, you saw this that I put up earlier in the program here, guys. I mean, where is the banning of, the Americans' visas? I mean, hey, here we go. I mean, 36 countries since World War II. They're loud and proud on the screen there. Where's the stripping of the American flags or the Canadian flags when these people are at events? Where's the blocking of their bank accounts or the stripping of them from the banking system? It really rattles me the more I think about it, because when you have stolen funds from a country, even though you're at conflict, I mean, is that their whole intentions? Did they actually think that they would push back against a nuclear superpower during this last 18 months or 19 months and actually think that they're going to win? I mean, does anybody here think that they're actually going to win? What is winning, gentlemen?
Oh, I think the biggest enemy of the collective West is the arrogance and the ignorance of their leaders. Just to give you an example, in 2019, there was a RAND Corporation that issued a very, very important paper, if you want to understand about the strategy of containing Russia. It was the name was Expanding Russia, and basically in that paper, and we are talking about 4 or 5 years ago, they already printed out everything they wanted to do with Russia. So Russia knew exactly where the collective West wanted to go, and there were even plans openly. They were saying, if you beat Russia, if there's a regime change, a revolution, we are going to partition Russia. We are going to Balkanize Russia. So that is openly. So you see. As much as so Russia knows exactly about what the collective West wants to do. Now take Putin, and we all know that Putin is an extremely smart person. He's a chess master, but additional to that, he's a judo master. So if you do judo, I'm not an expert, but basically you're kind of using the strength of the other, and basically because of using his strength, you get to put him down, and that is what Putin is doing. I think when you look at what Ukraine is doing now with Russia, Russia is on the defense, and Russia has Ukraine exactly where Russia wants Ukraine to be. I think the sanctions and the attack of the collective West towards Russia was something that was expected and hoped for. I think. Well, if you just see the outcome right now, it could not be more positive for Russia. But additional to that, I think Russia had the plan and had already somehow the tacit agreement with its partners, BRICS partners, and the partners of the global South. Because you see, everything they are doing now, which is related to the de-dollarization, it didn't start when the SMO started, the Special Military Operation started. It started well before. So you see, there's so I see the arrogance of the collective West. That arrogance is what is going to make it lose completely, because they always thought they were best, and they downplay the strength of Russia. They saw Russia. They used to name it. It's a gas station with the nuclear bombs. That's how they saw Russia. And Russia is far more than that. Actually, there's just issue that actually Russia is the fifth in purchasing power parity. It's the fifth largest economy in the world.
I mean, it's daunting, the task that it's going to take for the West to make any progress here. Brian, we had a report here, of course. I'm going to quote it from the Western media here, just so we can maybe correct its accuracy. Is there truth to the Ukrainians, getting past the first line of defense and possibly the second line of defense with what Russia has put up in that region? Is there any truth to that?
Well, you'll notice when they talk about that in these articles, they're very there's a lack of specifics. They don't talk about what line is what. They don't explain the overview of the battlefield. And what the only thing they could possibly be referring to is the security zone. And in the security zone, this confuses a lot of people. Even though the New York Times, I think, did a very good job way back in December of last year talking about these massive layered defense lines that Russia was creating, not only in Zaporozhye and Kherson, but also east of Bakhmut. And they're confused because there are trench systems in the security zone. And then there's a mobile defense in the security zone. And there's these towns that Russia had fortified in the security zone, and Ukraine is trying to work their way through all of this. They got to Rabatino and Robotny. These names are there's like two of them that are actually three of them that are very difficult, but I think people know what I'm talking about. They're working their way up to that. They have not even confirmed in any verifiable way taken that town, a very tiny town, a village. And that's what they're referring to. They have not reached the first of several main defensive lines. They have not. I think people might remember a few weeks ago, there was a lone armored personnel carrier that fell into one of these anti-tank ditches that were actually part of the main defense line. And they said, oh, Ukraine broke through the first line. No, they didn't. It was just this one APC. And then they said they saw some group of Ukrainian soldiers walking around Dragon's Teeth and one of these ditches. But that, just a handful of guys passing it doesn't mean they've broken through it. And we don't even know if that is confirmed. So no, what they're talking about is the security zone. Ukraine is trying to pass through that. They have not actually fully broken through that. So I don't know what they're talking about. They're trying to. Yeah, go ahead, Angelo.
Yeah, Brian. I think just think about it. If they had crossed that first line of defense, don't you expect they would have put a flag and make TikTok videos? Just think about it. We all know how they operate. It's all about narrative. It's all about showing off. They remember what they did once. They crossed Russia. They did 100 meters. They plugged a pole with the flag and just came back and because they wanted a picture. So if they had crossed the first line of defense, you would have massive media pictures, TikTok, soldiers dancing because they are winning. They are the champion of TikTok movies.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
So I haven't seen any of those videos.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. They're so ambiguous the way they're describing this. Like they're tiptoeing around the subject. If they had actually decisively broken through the first line of defense, or they were up to the second one, we would never hear the end of it. And because we are seeing these very ambiguous headlines, then I mean, that pretty much tells you everything you need to know.
Let me add to that, guys. I was speaking with one of my dad's friends. He was in the military many years ago, retired, and he said, "Listen, if Russia wanted to, tomorrow morning," he says, "since this is a special military operation, if they decided to move it up to a full-scale, say, war, we can use that." And Brian, you can probably help me with this because you have a lot of knowledge in this. He says there's a reason why they're not taking out railway lines, not taking out water filtration centers, electricity grids, absolutely decimating. He says because it's just an operation. Russia has the ability. He said within 3 days, they could level that entire place 10 times over without flexing a muscle. And he says, do you honestly? And I was curious. I said, well, why haven't they done that? And he said to me, well, to be honest with you, this is just a warning. And actually, it's kind of like, as Angelo said, you have the kid and the big brother here. Well, this is somebody saying, listen, we told you not to come in our backyard. You came in our backyard. Here's this. This is what's going to happen. We'll throw a beach ball in your yard. Stay away. Then you kick down the fence the second time. And you say, okay, enough is enough. You get out the garden hose and you start spraying people. And then the third time you get even more pissed off. So here's the Russians who have, I would say, been polite in the military offensive to, they haven't been dropping drones in the financial district of bloody Moscow. The Russia's not throwing drones in the middle of Kiev. I mean, this is an information war that the West, which has these social networking platforms that have silenced just about everybody, is losing. And they're losing it on the information war because people are getting smarter. And yes, the average person, just like me the other day, it's like, of course, you have to snap yourself out of it sometimes and say, wait a minute, of course Russia could level this place if they wanted to. What are they waiting for? And then you say, well, yes, it's a military operation. I mean, am I off on that, or is there some accuracy to that, Brian?
I think you're quite close there. There are a lot of things that Russia could do. You mentioned the electric grid. Remember when Russia was actually dismantling parts of the electric grid? They're not doing that anymore. And it's not as if they've run out of missiles, because we see them utilizing missiles every single day. You remember when people were saying that Russia was 1 month away from running out of missiles? That was many months ago. They seem to have more missiles now.
Fighting with shovels.
They must be throwing those shovels very, very far. So they definitely could do much more damage to Ukraine's infrastructure. They could create immensely more suffering for average Ukrainians, cripple whatever remains of the economy. As far as what they're doing along the line of contact, I think they are at with the level of men and machinery that they've mobilized, they are doing the maximum that they possibly can. If they could do more, I think that they would be. Of course, they always could mobilize more of the economy for the military. They could always do another mobilization and round up, more manpower. They could always do that, but they're not doing it. And I think it is a combination of what you said. It's a special military operation. They're also working very hard to manage escalation. They are not going to do what the West did, which is on the first day of the special military operation, the U.S. just used all of their atomic options in terms of economic sanctions. Everything that they could send to Ukraine, they've already sent to Ukraine. And Russia wants to maintain a variety of options to escalate if need be, to punish the West if they do things like threaten to set up a buffer zone somewhere in Western Ukraine, for example. So it's about maintaining that escalation dominance that Russia has demonstrated throughout this.
Angelo, thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think there's also it's a matter of communication for Putin, not only to its own population, because otherwise, I mean, if you're harming Ukraine, you are in contradiction to what you say. They are your brothers, and you want to protect them, and so he's aligned with what he says. But I think it's very important to see that there is a communication towards the partners, the friends of Russia, because how Russia is acting right now, how China is acting as far as this conflict is concerned, will define the world of tomorrow. So if they want to be consistent in non-alignment, in this multipolar world where you don't create those patterns of alliances, unconditional alliances, you need to be very careful when it comes to Putin, because otherwise other countries they'll be like, we are repeating the mistakes of World War I, World War II, those alliances, and they don't want Russia to be too aggressive, because it would be hard for them, those leaders, to sell this partnership to their population. So it's very important to see everything is doing. If he was much more aggressive, I think there would be a problem with BRICS, the extension of BRICS, and the speed, the process of de-dollarization. And I think everything is going smoothly according to plan. They're not panicking. I see emotion on the collective West. But do you see emotion on Putin's side? Everything that is happening right now has been planned for a long time.
I think that's a really good point that Angelo brought up. I've heard that point made before. It's always important to add on to what's going on the battlefield in Ukraine, the geopolitical implications, and how Russia has to maintain its alliances. So could you imagine if they were so much more aggressive? That would put countries like India and China, here in Southeast Asia, everybody would be put in a very difficult position, and they're all being pressured by the U.S. to switch sides, and it would make it all that much more difficult to resist. They would be under so much more pressure if Russia wasn't more careful with that. That's a really good point, Angelo.
I'm still surprised at how the Americans are keeping their economy, surprisingly, their markets and their dollar still healthy at this point. I think there's some serious window dressing going on in that economy. You don't raise interest rates, 12 or 13 consecutive times over the last couple of years, and there's no repercussion. I bet you there is a hell of a lot of people hurting right now, or a lot of people that woke up and thought that they were 1 or 2 years away from finishing their mortgages, and now that's being pushed out another 5, maybe even 10 years. This stuff, that's, I think, where this, I call it the trade. What is the war trade? Where it comes out, it's going to come out in ma and pa. It's going to come out in, the younger generation that maybe 100 grand doesn't make ends meet in America anymore, or $150,000 doesn't get you much anymore. And this is where we see that a lot of this world is now saying, wait a minute, we know who our enemies are and we know who our allies are. It's very clear what we've seen here in the last 19 months, who is on whose side and whatnot. And if you think about it, if you looking at it, as Angelo said, from a geopolitical standpoint, Russia is long everything that China needs. Whether it's trees, whether it's mining, whether it's all these sectors, whether it's oil and gas. And what does Russia need? They need a banking system that can compete against the American banking system. And what a better neighbor to have with 1.5 billion people who have a banking system that could easily go around and basically take out the American banking system as we know it. I'm hearing from our friends in Russia that Bank of China has been opening up branches a lot, and it will continue to do so. Like I said, there is no going back. If you're a Russian person, or if you're in the military, or if you're in the government, I mean, you got to be extremely careful now where you travel around the world. the Americans have made every Russian person a target, and they've made every Ukraine person open your doors for them. Here it is, come on in, whatever you need, we're here. Yet at the end of the day, the collective West has convinced a country that, hey, put as many guys as you want up, we'll fight to the last soldier. And there is some truth to that statement. As horrifying as it sounds that Lindsey Graham made, I think, was it Lindsey Graham that made that statement, we'll fight to the last soldier?
Yes, last Ukrainian to the last Ukrainian.
To the last Ukrainian.
And that it was a great investment. And I don't think he was the only one. I think this is something that many U.S. politicians have been saying. It's not even a secret. It's out in the open. It's a proxy war waged against Russia at Ukraine's expense. And this is what they say. It's such a great investment. We're not spilling any American blood. It's just Ukrainians. And so and what they don't say is, so who cares? But that's what they think. They're thinking, so who cares? It's just Ukrainians. They're just Slavs killing Slavs. And these Ukrainians don't even realize that they are Slavs. They think they're some lost Aryan tribe or something. So it works out perfect for us. It's horrible. And they've engineered Ukraine over many years to achieve this, to set up this proxy war. They're doing the same thing in Taiwan, as Angelo always points out, in regards to manipulating the education system there, convincing people there that somehow they're not Chinese.
It's quite interesting. I spent a few hours on WikiLeaks website a couple of months back to try to dig out what I could dig out. And there was some cable communication between Lithuania and Ukraine and the Americans as early as 2004, saying there was NATO ambitions. I mean, this is stuff that the average person, if they put a bit of time into doing some research in this, can pull this information up, thanks to Edward Snowden and the crew. But I mean, it's kind of, that whole point, as you said, Brian, to the last Ukrainian soldier. I mean, that is, to think about that and how many of these young guys are dying down there and convinced that, they're fighting because big bad Russia. This is much, much deeper. I mean, Angelo, you were recently in Europe. What is the mood? What is the tempo? Is it everybody hate Russia? What is it like over there when you were there last?
Well, the problem is that the mainstream media are controlled by the oligarchy, European oligarchy, which are part of the globalist elites. So there's this cancel culture. They basically cancel you. You have no right to say anything. And actually, they've been hammering some journalists. Some journalists are going to jail in Germany. They're threatening whoever is speaking out, who has a voice against this. But slowly people are starting to stand up, slowly, because ultimately I think news are getting out that about the reality on the ground, and also people are doing their homework. Hopefully we are doing part of our job here to inform people. So there's a shift, but again, it's just the information space is controlled by those globalist elites that actually want to go ahead in this new world order project. I don't like the term, but that's what they want. They actually say it openly. They've been saying over and over, we are heading towards a new world order, and that new world order it's about being controlled. Not by the US. I think it's a shortcut. We tend to say US, but we need to talk about globalist elites. Globalist elites don't actually recognize countries. For the globalist elite, the world is going to be a big market, and it is going to be a system of control. That's the ultimate goal. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Again, the first, you see, when we talk about the US, who are the first victims of the US? Their own people. The US, Americans are victims of their elites. And I mean, those big, elites and big multinational corporation, military industrial complex, and the pharma, and they want to control. And you see those. It's interesting. We see actually the financing. I don't know if you've noticed, Brian, but usually those NGOs, the financing was states sponsoring those NGOs. But what we see more and more, we see actually direct corporation financing those NGOs, and I think because they want to step out, the countries wants to step out, and it looks nicer to have those NGOs being backed by big corporation. So if you criticize them, you say, well, it's Coca-Cola paying. Well, of course, it's just they're getting more and more subtle.
Yeah, it's hard to identify, Brian. I'm going to let Brian add on this. It's really hard to identify how some of these NGOs are wrapped up. I mean, if you think about it, Brian, with NGOs, I mean, Thailand's got an issue with it. Hong Kong had a major issue with it. I mean, how do they get away with it?
It's a process that has evolved over the years. They created, well, before the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA was funding regime change all around the world, funding opposition groups and regime change operations. And then it shifted over to the National Endowment for Democracy. And then as people began to understand what the National Endowment for Democracy was doing, they started burying that. If you regularly check their website year to year, different countries that they fund programs in, you will see them erasing the names of the actual organizations from the descriptions of the programs. And so you have to dig more and more and more. And they know ordinary people aren't going to do this. And they can always say, no, we never hid it. It's there. You just have to dig for it. But they know ordinary people aren't going to dig for it. And then, as Angelo said, they have a lot of these corporate foundations, either adjacent to the NED or taking over from the NED. They also do a lot of proxy funding. So just the way the U.S. uses another country to fight a war for them, they're using other countries to fund these NGOs. So you'll see a lot of these NGOs here in Thailand, for example, trying to hide the U.S. government money and taking instead Canadian or French or German money. And those organizations, just like the NED, they have names that they don't sound like a government organization, and you have to do a lot of research just to figure out who these groups are. So that's what they're doing. It's constantly evolving. When people start catching on to the corporate foundations, they'll just change it again. What they're doing now, more and more, is just completely covering it up. There's zero transparency, but then you get to use that against them. The whole point of the NED was to make it look transparent. But then when people realize, well, you're just transparently politically capturing countries, that's terror. That's against international law. You can't do that. So now they're just going to completely cover it up. So it's going back to the way it started with the CIA doing covert regime change. It's not the CIA doing it. It's all these organizations that have experience built up over decades now doing it, but they're covering it up just like the CIA used to. So it's very complicated. And Angelo was saying about how the American people, this is a separate thought here, how the American people are the first victims of American imperialism. And Alex, you were just playing that clip at the beginning of the show, and they were talking about Chinese fentanyl. It's like America doesn't have any control at all over what passes over its borders and what the people within their borders are doing. You understand how weak and pathetic that makes the American government look when they use that as an excuse, as if China has some sort of power over the U.S. and the U.S. can't do anything about it. It's America killing Americans with fentanyl. It's American pharmaceutical corporations that were bringing it in. It's CIA armed and funded cartels in Mexico making it. They're buying the raw materials from China using intermediary companies that China has no way of knowing whether it's legitimate or not. And then it gets funneled through Mexico or somewhere else in Central or South America into the U.S. So it's America killing Americans with fentanyl, just as Angelo said.
Can I add one more?
Please do. Please, Angelo, go.
Alex, I'd like to add one more thing, and we don't talk much about this. We know the whole concept of NGOs and how they can influence politics. They can do color revolution. I think there's an element which is really important to analyze is all those candidates all around the world. In many countries, you have those candidates that are actually that have been pre-selected very early on. Very often they pre-select them at university level. Actually, those ones are getting grants. Sometimes it's George Soros Foundation. I'll give you an example. Vivek. Vivek is a presidential candidate. He had a Soros Foundation funding him when he was very young. So very early on, they identify them and then they groom them over time. And then they get finance. They go through the global young leaders, World Economic Forum, and so on. And it is something really interesting that I found out lately. You can actually go into Wikipedia. You can actually look for the list of attendees of Bilderberg Group, and you will see that there are lots of presidents that attended Bilderberg Group. But when they attended the Bilderberg Group? Between 1 and 5 years before being elected. So basically, it is like the mafia. It's like the mafia. When you are made man, we call it made man. So basically, you become untouchable, and you have to go through a ritual. So you have several steps. They identify them at university level, then they get funded by those NGOs support. Then you have all the media that back them up. They give them visibility, and they build up that story. And then they end up in Bilderberg Group. That's the last step. I'll give you an example. Macron, he went through the Global Young Leaders. It was the World Economic Forum. And 2 years before being elected, he went through Bilderberg Group. Bill Clinton, he was a governor of Arkansas. A few years before being elected, he went to Bilderberg Group. That means you need to look at who is going to Bilderberg Group, and you can bet probably it's a matter of time, is going to be president very soon. So you see, it's a completely hijacking the whole idea of democracy. They control everything. Not only the media are controlled. You look at France. France is a ninth very rich family. They control the media. So they control the brain of people. Then you have Hollywood. Then you have all those NGOs. And then, it goes as deep as the education. Look at what those kids are being taught at school. 95% of parents don't want this BS of LGBT education to their kids. They don't want... in France, they want kids as early as 6 years old to start sexual education. 99% of parents don't want that. Well, you know what? The system controls the education. And we saw that in Hong Kong too. In Hong Kong, they had poured money into the lobbies, the unions of teachers unions. And basically, because of that, they were controlled by the West. And they issued books that were anti-Chinese books. That was before the national security law in Hong Kong. So you see, it's very, very complex. But it's a pure hypocrisy to even talk about democracy. It's been a long time. Maybe we never had democracy in the first place. It's just an illusion.
Here's a program that I would like to. I'll bring that up in a moment, Brian. Just got your note now.
Thank
I'll bring that up. Sorry, I just saw it in the corner of my eye.
I just put it there just now,
okay.
So it's okay.
This is a show that's on Netflix right now. It's called Painkiller. I don't know if anyone's ever saw it, but it's exactly what Angelo was talking about. This is the Sackler family, a Canadian family that financed and really it got behind the marketing of the opioid crisis in the United States by using a drug called OxyContin and oxycodone or whatever. But it was a super drug that helped fight pain management. And it was quite good. Sorry about my lighting, guys. Just one of my lightings just went out. I'll get it fixed. But this was quite incredible story. It's a 8-part series. I didn't think that they could have 8 parts to it, but it just kept getting more ridiculous. It showed how the company brought a pain drug to the market, to the opioid market, hired majority females to go out and market this product to the doctors, who then marketed it to their clients. Now, there is some medical information that does support that this does work, but when abused, of course, it has a catastrophic effect, and many people have died in America about it. But it walked us through the whole thing, and at the end, the guys basically said, well, we got enough money to settle as long as we don't admit. And you'll see that a lot in a lot of American civil lawsuits. We do not, claim to admit, or what's the saying? Does somebody know what I'm talking about? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Alex, I know what you're saying is something that I've tried to point out many times. If you go to the official U.S. Department of Justice website and you just in the search bar just type in Pfizer, and you will see page after page after page of settlements by Pfizer, and you could do the same thing with any other pharmaceutical company. This is all they do. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They market things they know are dangerous, even to children. They pay doctors to sign off on it. They give them kickbacks if they prescribe it, even if it's unnecessary. So they're just drug dealers in lab coats. That's all they are. Yeah.
This program, I was shocked. I mean, I was watching it, and it just kept getting deeper and deeper. And you saw the recruiting by this company. The company's called Purdue Pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure if the parent company, and you should see how all these structures are set up. I clearly understand how these corporations are set up. A lot of them have the parent company. The parent company usually has subsidiaries. So subsidiaries are set up in individual states. So if somebody wanted to sue the company, they would sue the subsidiary. But if the subsidiary came under too much power, they would just wind it up, file it, bankruptcy, and that's it. It would never, ever hit the parent company. And that's what a lot of these, when you hear a lot of these companies go to the wall, are bankrupt, read the fine print. As Brian said, read the fine print. You'll see subsidiary, or a company that is connected. Many of these corporations, especially these drug companies, have subsidiaries in other countries as well. And it's extremely impossible to shut these gangsters down. And it showed in that whole documentary, which is, I got to commend Netflix or whoever produced it, because they did let a lot of stuff come out, and about the drug industry, which is, pretty brave today. It's pretty hard to get a lot of financing for films when you're going against the government. It's almost virtually impossible to get that type of funding. But that whole program, I won't tell you how it ended, but it was definitely worth a watch if you want to see what Brian is exactly talking about here. And as you say, Angelo, there is an agenda going on here in the school system. We're also seeing, and this is where I'm going to bring up, a couple of these major U.S. corporations that are involved in this. And this plays part in, the conflict that we're in right now. Is if you have the media on side in one pocket, you have a lot of the other companies on side, like the militaries. You got BlackRock. Well, what does BlackRock have in its portfolio? BlackRock owns 7 out of the biggest 10. They're major shareholders in 7 out of the biggest 10 news disseminators. They have investments in Bloomberg. They have it in Disney. They have it in CNN. They have it in Fox. They're writing the narrative. They're writing everything, whatever they want to write. Oh, casualties. Oh, we're gaining momentum. All they got to do is say, hey, knock, knock, guys. Hey, we're your biggest investor. You might want to think about what you're going to print. If you don't think it's happening, it's happening. And that's why when Angelo makes that point about some of these school systems, there's an agenda here. This agenda is very deep, everybody. It's extremely deep. I've had endless arguments with my sister, who has been part of the school board in Canada, about this. I said, it wouldn't surprise me in 10 years if a whole pile of people in the school board system who have rallied behind this woke movement go to jail, because some of them deserve to be in jail for what they're doing. And it's crazy. But we are hearing, the modifications of human beings in potentially what is supposed to be the class country for love, peace, liberty, and freedom. It's crazy. I mean, Angela, maybe you can add to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see, I'd like to compare the military and the pharma industry. You see, we see clearly what is happening in Ukraine. We have military in the West, which are money-driven, not purpose-driven. So basically, they need to make money. They need to make expensive weapons, but they don't create an industry which actually could fight wars. Because you need to have capacity. You have, if you don't have capacity, you just there's an order and you do it whenever you need. You need to have extra capacity, very large capacity, and no, because they don't have that, because it's money driven, and they make very expensive weapons. Just you can compare, you can screen, same weapon in Russia and in the West is probably 1 to 5 the cost, because there's lots of bribes, it's the corruption and so on. Well, pharma is the same. Pharma is money driven. I'm going to give you a figure. In the US, the GDP, the part of healthcare is 19%. And we all know that the healthcare system is going down. Life expectancy is going down. Infant mortality is going up. Those are two indicators, easy indicator that tells you that the quality of healthcare is going down. That's 19% in the US. In China, life expectancy is higher than in the US, and the system is way better. It is 6%. Why? Because pharma in the US is money-driven, not purpose-driven. I'm going to give you another example, and this is pure philosophy. In China, the incentive of doctors is to prevent you to be sick. Did you hear that? To prevent you to be sick. Doctors in the US, if you are sick and you keep on coming and they sell you medicines and they do expensive treatment, they are going to make money. They tied is incentive to the whole system of making money and having use, keeping you sick. And this goes down, actually, it goes back here. I guess you guys probably know it was the Corbett report. He did a documentary about this, it was the Rockefeller actually that started pouring a lot of money into the pharma industry. And basically they put money into universities. They had the obligation, there was lots of treatment that were natural, but they had the obligation to shift towards chemical medicines, and so we lost lots of huge knowledge in terms of natural medicines that were curing people a long time ago. I give you an example. You see, for example, when you have problems, muscle problems, you have pains in your back and so on, you have a system of cupping. Are you familiar with that, Alex? In China, the cupping they put.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But you know what? Very often, you do that within 45 minutes, your pain can go away completely. You can even buy the set of cupping that costs you $20. If you're in the West, you are going to go to the physio. You are going to go 6-7 times. It's going to cost you $1,000. And you know what? It might not go away. That's the problem of purpose-driven and money-driven. And we see that in many, many ways. So you see, when you have 6% versus 19%, that shows you also how our GDP is completely inflated. The same service, even better, costs you 3 times less. And that's the whole mentality. Again, in China, they could never do that. They could never do that. Why? Because they put people first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add to that, Angelo. Once again, seeing these pharmaceutical companies, it is quite deep. And, if you look at the medical system as well, this is indebted many people. I don't know. I'm going to ask you this, Brian. Is it mandatory for Americans, even if they're out of the country, to buy healthcare? Do they have to?
I don't know. No one ever told me that I had to, and I've been out of the U.S. for a really long time. But there was a point where they had this so-called Obamacare, where they were forcing people. Yeah, they were forcing people to get this, and and people had to, or they had to pay some sort of fee to the government. It was a racket. It was just to force people to buy medical insurance within a completely rigged healthcare system, just as Angelo said. All the prices are inflated. They suppress treatments that work. They overcharge things that work, so people steer away from them and just pop their pills instead. And then you have the insurance racket. You pay all this money into insurance, and then when you actually need to make a claim, they have all this creative accounting so that they don't have to. And it is a complete racket. And it's as if you're just one of these people living on the block where the mafia runs everything, and they're just going to wring you dry. But they just do it. They make it look more official, and they call it Obamacare instead of protection money or whatever it is that they're trying to collect. And it is wringing Americans dry. And I hear Americans tell me, people that I know that still live in the U.S., and they, everyone in the family is working and they still can't make ends meet because the taxes are going up. Everything costs more. They're deathly afraid of getting sick because they know they won't be able to pay their medical bills. And what kind of way is that to live? It's not.
Yeah, behind me here is China, and the system here. I was chatting with an American guy last night talking about the same thing, and this is quite a knowledgeable guy, and he was asking me quite basic questions that I would have thought that the average person would understand, and they were questions like, how much is medical there? Well, you can get insurance, and you can go and pay. And, he says, well, okay, an example, broken arm. Well, not that I've broken my arm, but I can tell you if I did break my arm, knock on wood, that I could probably afford it, no problem. Breaking an arm in maybe America, I don't know, 15 grand, maybe 20 grand, who knows, right? Depends what hospital, what state. I'm going to shift back to Ukraine, then we'll move over to China. I mean, Brian, the casualties here have to be, biblical. When could this end, and how long would it take them to, reconstruct or try to, or is Ukraine over as we see it? Is the future for Ukraine done? And if it is, or if not, the casualties too. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of bodies that need to be buried, or there's neighborhoods and homes and that have been just bombed out. It's scorched earth there, isn't it? In that range, I don't even think people could live there anymore, could they?
Well, the problem is that whatever is left of Ukraine, as long as it's linked to the U.S., NATO, the European Union, that it has no future. The U.S., the European Union, they don't even invest in themselves. Why are they going to invest in some proxy that's not even part of the EU or NATO officially? So all they were doing this entire time was using Ukraine. They were militarizing it to turn it into a battering ram, a disposable battering ram to use against Russia. Now, as far as casualties go, I heard the Russian Ministry of Defense cite the number of 60-something thousand casualties, dead and injured, over the course of just the offensive. That is a huge number of casualties. A lot of people are saying it's higher. I think the Russian Ministry of Defense's numbers are probably the most reasonable numbers you will hear come out of any government regarding this conflict. But that is a huge number of casualties. And then you add it to what Ukraine has lost over the whole course of the special military operation. You even had the Ukrainian government at some points admitting that just in, say, Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, they were losing 200 dead a day. That was Kiev admitting that. You just do the math and just add it up over time when there is serious fighting. Just, figure out how much is that 200 a day for however many days. There are huge casualties. Okay, so this was what I asked Alex to share. This was when Angelo was... No worries. Angelo was talking about Bilderberg, and I know some people are like, "Oh, Bilderberg, you're going to start talking about lizard people living underground." But that is how the Western world is run. It's run by building consensus within these forums. There isn't just one forum that runs everything. There are multiple forums. There are multiple think tanks. You have people cross-pollinating the boards of directors of all of these organizations. And this is one specifically for Southeast Asia, Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. And what they do is they just get young people, they indoctrinate them, they bring them to the US, they go through an education program or professional program, they bring them to Washington, they really make them feel special and as if they're part of it. And when they go back to, say, Thailand or Cambodia or whatever country in Southeast Asia they're from, their alliance, their loyalty will lie with the United States and these people that treated them special. They will resent the fact that they're not treated special in their own country, and they will work their way into the media, into politics, into the business world. They usually get a budget from the U.S. government in one way or another, and this is how the U.S. This is how the U.S. builds cadres.
Seeds for Future award funding for your public service projects.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's modern day imperialism. And if you read historical accounts of how Rome would colonize a region, the way they would take a tribe, take the young people from that tribe, bring them to Rome, and then send them back with their togas and their baths and everything else. And they thought, hey, I'm more civilized than these primitive tribesmen that used to be my brothers and sisters. But in actuality, all of these Roman trappings, these were the chains of their enslavement, had nothing to do with civilization or progress. It was colonization. This is exactly what the U.S. is doing 2,000 plus years later.
And look at that. Between the ages of 18 and 35, youth and people starting out into careers, be a citizen and resident of an Asian country, and be interested in working on economic development, BS, environmental protection, BS, and education or civic engagement. Thanks for the indoctrination. Wow, where did you find this gem?
I mean, this is what I've been covering here in Thailand and Southeast Asia for years and years and years. This was from the Obama administration. It's still going strong. It's continued under Trump and then the Biden administration. And it's just an add-on to everything the U.S. has been doing over the decades to maintain what is a modern day empire. They have adjacent programs that work their way into the universities, into the media landscape, and they just take over everything. They bring you in, they make you feel special, and then when there's something that needs to say for these media circles, when something happens, these Thai journalists are going to want to report it from a Western perspective because they don't want to be excluded from that group. And that's exactly what will happen. So if you're a Thai journalist and you are indoctrinated into this group and you see something that's happening that doesn't go along with the Western narrative, I've actually seen, say, the BBC, the people from the BBC here in Thailand dogpile on them on Twitter, for example, say, "Oh, I can't believe you're saying that. Are you sure is that what you really want to say?" And what they're doing is basically threatening them. If you don't go along with this narrative the way we laid it out, then you're going to be excluded from the group. And this is something these people fear because a lot of people get into journalism or education or any of these things because they think they honestly believe in it. But once they start making money or getting some recognition, they realize that's actually what they really want. And they want to keep getting that, and they'll compromise their principles in order to continue getting that.
Yeah, I'm going to add to what your latest example was. I, many years ago, had a few months of my life where I decided that maybe I want to go volunteer and do some volunteer work. And I reached out and started to look on the internet for volunteering. So I would look at one of Europe's poorest countries, Moldova. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I don't know, help plant something, whatever you can do, right, for a volunteer. Maybe help build houses or something. And the more I started to look, I kept hitting NGOs, organizations, government organizations. There was nothing out there where, I contact them. Hey, I'd like to come help. What does the orphanage need? Do they need some clothes for the kids, some toys for the kids? No, money. You can donate. Okay. Can we drop off a care basket to the organization? No, money. And I was like, what is going? And this, Brian, this wasn't one I spent probably the good part of 3 or 4 days nonstop on the internet trying to find places where I could, and my wife could go and try to help make a difference. All of it was there's a big wall in front of it, and you couldn't, no matter what you tried. Sure, there's a food bank here and there, but anything of, that would make a difference, whether it's, assisting, helping, building homes, you name it, it was impossible. And it was all fronted by a lot of, UNICEF was massive in this. Okay. UNICEF was everywhere. And then of course the UN, they're there, and you can't get in there. It's like it's completely controlled, even from the lower part of the economy in these countries. And Moldova is riddled with NGOs, and that's why I fear that country could be, potentially a hotbed here. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Well, I'll just say one quick thing. What the U.S. uses these so-called non-governmental organizations, which are funded by the U.S. government. So they're not NGOs in any sense of the word, but what they're doing is they're building a parallel system within a country. So that country has its own indigenous institutions, and what the U.S. does is build parallel institutions. They build up the political opposition, and then when there's a tipping point where that opposition can get into power, they already have this parallel system ready to just overwrite that country's sovereignty. They did it with the EU across all of Europe. They've been trying to do it here in Thailand. They do it all across Southeast Asia, and it is through the NGOs. That is how they do it. And if you look all the way back to British imperialism, that they were using things like missionaries and like proto NGOs to do exactly this, all under the guise of, say, charity. But what it really was working their way into a society and just overriding it with British institutions. So the US is doing the exact same thing with their so-called NGOs, which is why, say, China or Russia, they passed laws to heavily restrict these NGOs because they're not actually NGOs, and no country should tolerate them because it is an assault on their sovereignty.
Yeah, I think, Angelo, you can share. I'm sure you can share us some of your insight on Hong Kong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. We need to get back always about that single point of sovereignty. People actually confused. They talk first about democracy, and then they say, and then they ignore sovereignty. Well, democracy has no meaning if there is no sovereignty, because sovereignty is a process of self-determination. If you have decisions that for your country that are made in Washington, that is not a democracy. So it comes down always to, do you have sovereignty? And there's sovereignty is only not only the borders, physical borders, but it's your whole information space, and non-interference, foreign interference in your own country. As simple as that. So when you have those NGOs, for example, in Thailand, you have an NGO funded by the West, which wants actually the main task is to influence, to have Thailand to change its constitution. I mean, it doesn't get any deeper than that. This is absolutely crazy. So whenever we analyze a country, we need to first ask that question. It doesn't matter whoever is in power, but sovereignty is the first thing. So you need to understand what is the reality there. So these days we talk a lot about African countries. And when you look at this sovereign state, even the one that actually did the revolution, Mali, Burkina Faso, and so on, they don't even print their own money. They have a U.S. army, they have French army on the ground. They're not sovereign states. And again, I think I'm very strict when it comes to sovereignty. Even in European countries, I think most European countries have lost their sovereignty, because decisions I mean, some countries like Italy and Germany, they're still occupied by tens of thousands of U.S. troops.
Yeah.
Then you have also, because most European countries, the real decisions are all made in Brussels. And they all listening to lobbies that are controlled by international corporations. So we really need to define what, sovereignty, and then we need to define a democracy. So when it was in Hong Kong, the problem we had was that the handover was done in 1997, and within the Constitution of Hong Kong, what we call the Basic Law, the government of Hong Kong was supposed to enact Article 23, which is enacting a national security law. National security law just makes sure that you don't have that foreign interference. Because we didn't have that in 2019, you had literally CIA agents running in the streets with the protesters. They were teaching them how to make and throw petrol bombs. I mean, it was openly because there was a loophole. They didn't fill in the gap of national security law. So what I like to say when it comes to Hong Kong is that Hong Kong's handover was not in 1997. The real handover was in 2020, where they enacted the national security law. And you see, the protests were massive. I have to be honest about this. Probably what they claim 1-2 million, that's BS, but there's probably between 100 to 200,000. Of course, there was, and not everybody, only a small minority were very anti-Chinese, but was very often those colored revolutions are hijacked by a minority which is controlled by foreign powers. So 100 to 100,000. For the national security law, there was a petition signed by over 2 million people. But this information was never put in Western media. So you see, so now when it comes to Hong Kong, well, now it's actually no more my business. Just because now it's internal affairs, it's Chinese affair. Whatever they decide, the system is their business. So what I wish, whenever it comes to geopolitics, is let's take the example of India. You know what? Do the West need to like Modi or not? It's not. It's up to Indians. Political system. Do we have to like them? No, it's up to Indians. Every time it's live and let live. Non-interference in other countries' business. It's the same as you have a home. You have your family, and you have someone knocking on your door, and he wants to say, well, you should do this and that with your family. No, that's my home, and I'm not going to do that in your home. And if we had that globally, imagine how better things would be. Cooperation would be just very pragmatic. It's about building prosperity, mutual gains, building infrastructure, peace and stability. Because when you're focusing on tangible stuff, I'm talking about mutual prosperity, you need to have peace. If you focus on business, you need to have stability. When you have stability, society can thrive. Just imagine so much energy that the collective West, since World War II, the collective West has done everything it could to contain the global South. Africa is so rich in natural resources, it could be so developed. It would be amazing what they could do. No, so much energy that we put there. And you know what? That energy we put there, not only we contain them, and that's inhumane. It's inhumane. And you know what? And we feel that we're helping them when we tell them, oh, come to my country. You know what? The one that come to our country are going to work as a slave labor. That's how we say we are humanitarian. We're helping them. No, we're using them. Not only you. They're being raped in their home, and then they come here and they work as slave labor.
Yeah, I think Libya is a good example.
And those resources we put into containing. When I say containing the global South, it's also the military industrial complex, 900 army bases around the world, regime change, CIA. I mean, the budget, we talk about trillions. And over the 50 years, imagine if that money would have been put in our own society.
You don't have to imagine it, because China's actually doing it right now. And notice how the US is fighting tooth and nail to stop China from helping Africa finally develop after all these years. Same with Laos, north of Thailand, landlocked, impoverished, bombed into the Stone Age by the United States during the Vietnam War. China comes in, they help them build a highway, they help them build high-speed rail. Now they're finally connected to the rest of the region. You can see the tangible progress in Laos. If you've traveled there over the last several years, as I have, you can see the tangible progress. And I remember how it seemed frozen in time until the rise of China and China's involvement and doing exactly what you said, Angelo, actually investing money in these countries to help develop them. And it is a win-win. People are like, well, I don't believe China would just help out of the goodness of their heart. It's not out of the goodness of their heart. They are winning too. They want to do business. They want to trade. And if they could build up Laos and Laos can do more trade, then that benefits China. It's a no-brainer. It's not complicated. The thing that is, maybe someone here can add to this. What is wrong with the mindset of people in the West, where they think the only way anyone could operate geopolitically is by trying to cut everyone's throat and take everything that they have? I mean, not every country does that.
Yeah, additional to that, I would say that people need to learn about history when it comes to China. China has never been hegemonic. Just a simple example, why did China build a big wall, the Great Wall? Was to protect itself from invaders. I mean, if you want to expand, why build a wall, you know? And then China had the possibility. It was, you know, when Christopher Columbus, he went to America, China had the fleet. There was probably 100,000 bigger. It was so big, but they were not interested in colonizing. What they did, they created the trading stations around the world for trading, but they didn't want to conquer. You know, and you know, China was much more developed. Actually, it could have wiped out. You know, it could have gone all the way to Europe. But you know what? It was just backward. They were not interested. They were interested in trading. And again, if people I live in China. I know how the thinking. You know, they're very pragmatic. They're very down to earth. It's like it needs to be tangible. Ideology, who cares? Sexuality, who cares? Religion, who cares? You know what they care about? What do I have on my table? I have food or not? Do I have a roof? Yes or not? My life is getting better every day? Yes or not? Can I put my kids to school? Can I give them education? And you know what? And then one thing which is really, really important, they think in terms of society. I think some of the problems we have, you know, Western societies, is that we put too much the individual at the center. It's me, myself, and I. And your action as a single individual are going to influence who's around you. What if you're in a quiet place and you start shouting? Well, you know what? You need to think about, I'm not alone in this room. If I do that, this time they're a victim, but next time you're going to be the victim. Chinese, because it's so big, it's so complex. Well, you know what? They know that it's not only about me, it's about the rest. And I'll give you just one example, the mask. I'm not a fan of masks, you know, but why do Asians wear masks? It's not to protect if someone else has the virus. It's if I'm sick, I need to protect the others. So you see, Western society, self-centered, individualistic, and then you have Asians. And actually the global South, you know, more considerate and thinking in terms of society. When you have that, you can plan for the next generation, because it's not going to be about, oh, you know what, I want to have a good life now. Do you have a project of society? Yes, you have a project of society. But what if you have a project of society? What if you have a vision? What if you have a plan? What if you have a vision? And then you can plan for the next generation, because it's not going to be about, oh, you know what, I want to have a good life now. Do you have a project of society? Have you ever heard about this? This concept in the West, having a project of society. What do we want for the next generations? You know what? Sadly for us, Russia has it. China has it.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is some stuff. This is the BRI that Brian was talking about earlier, and Angelo was also talking about these relationships that China does have with countries, especially many African countries. It's 152 nations that have signed up so far. A lot of this is infrastructure financing, and I think Brian, you've covered Laos many times. You nailed it when you're saying that things have massively changed in the region. People are these countries are starting to see, hey, wait a moment, no one cared about our country for years, and now here comes China. They're investing. Sure, it's an investment. Of course, they would like the investment to pay off, but China has actually forgiven some of the debt that is causing some of these nations some issues here. But all in all, I mean, we see it happening here. I mean, the city of Chongqing here, we have, I think it's called the International Land Sea Trade Corridor, Chengdu-Chongqing Economic Circle. I mean, these things are all moving at breaking speed. And you can just see by some of the images on the screen here, this is China getting down there where these countries were, at the mercy of getting funding from the UK or the IMF. I mean, those are the last crooks that you want to go get money from. And France, they had decades to pump money into these countries. They refused. They stopped, no, or they left them in poverty, as Angelo would say. And these are nations that are seeing what's going on geopolitically wise in this world. They're looking at, say, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to get pushed over like we did 20 or 30 years ago. Look at Russia. Russia stood up for itself right now against the world, or we'll call it most of the collective West and NATO countries. And now we're seeing Niger. I mean, this is interesting. This could be, depending on what way this goes, I mean, there's some confidence down there in that. Brian, maybe you could talk to us with us about Niger. And there was a question. I don't know if you're going to answer it, but there was a question about Gonzalo Lira. So let's start with Africa. And
I'll just say real quick about Gonzalo Lira. I don't know what has happened to him. He was arrested again, and he was awaiting trial, and he's probably just going to rot in jail because the State Department knows full well what his situation is, and they couldn't care less. And people who think Gonzalo Lira is some sort of SBU asset, you're stupid. Your brain doesn't work. That's all. I don't know how to say it politely. You're dumb and your brain doesn't work. He is not an SBU asset. The explanations for what he would be doing as an SBU asset make absolutely no sense. The people who were purveying this were called out on the different scenarios they imagined or attempted to pass off, and they would change the scenario because they realized how stupid it sounded. And their main goal was just they didn't like Gonzalo, so they wanted to see him suffer, and this was a big opportunity. So that's with Gonzalo Lira. Now regarding Niger, I'm not an expert on Africa, but what I would say about Niger and the rest of the continent is that the West, Europe, and then the U.S. as their successor, I mean, it has been a project of imperialism. They have exploited, divided, and destroyed the continent for generations. And people look at Africa and they say, a lot of people will say, oh, it's Africa's fault. They don't want to build anything. But in actuality, if you look at the history, even just recent history, anytime anything is being built in Africa, the US or Europe or all of them together will come in and physically, literally destroy it. Alex, you were talking about Libya. That is exactly what they did in Libya. So with Niger, this is part of a domino effect. A lot of these nations want to get out from under the shadow of French colonialism. And so there's the ECOWAS, who may or may not intervene in Niger, and France, which may or may not back that intervention, maybe with air power assets, just like they did in Libya. So we just have to wait and see. But no matter which way it goes, the vector sum is in favor of Africa's sovereignty, finally. And the US and Europe, this toxic presence they have on the continent, being displaced once and for all. And a lot of it is owed to Russia and China, who want to actually do business there in Africa with all of these nations. And they want stability for Africa. The US and Europe want instability. That is how they control an entire continent with so many people. So we just have to wait and see how it plays out. I think we have to be patient. It's just like with the Middle East. That was an area where we thought no progress would be made, and now we see Saudi Arabia and Iran working closer together. We see even Turkey starting to kind of reverse their stance regarding Syria, and whether people believe it or not, eventually Israel is going to have to enter into reality, and the fact that if they want to continue to exist, they need to act like a normal nation state, recognize and respect their neighbors and work together. And I think that it is possible. And I think it will be China and Russia's presence and influence in the region that is a catalyst for all of that to happen, from Africa to the Middle East and to Central Asia even.
We see an upcoming visit with Putin and Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Any comments on that, guys?
Angelo?
No, I just want to continue just a little bit on Africa, because it's then we'll jump into Kim Jong-il. But I mean, Africa, there's also the climate change agenda, this whole hysteria, the Greta Sept cult, this movement. If you look at this movement, it's also about how we impose conditions that are not acceptable, feasible for Africa to contain Africa. How can you have, you cannot jump from no electricity to renewable energy. You just can't. Most of Africa is not electrified. We have denied to them basic human rights. So now this climate change agenda, it's about how we contain them. We put them pressure. You cannot produce electricity using coal and so on. So we need to keep that in mind. Those are the same people that told us that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's the same thing, Then in Niger is actually, I don't know if you guys follow, but they say that Niger finally is going to get serious money because of uranium. I don't know what percentage, but some actually, I've seen some tweets. They were saying that he went from 0.8 euro per kilo to 200. So the ratio was 0.8 to 200. So imagine how much revenues it's been stolen for decades. I think they started in the 70s. For decades, billions of dollars, and we kept Nigeria so poor. Now jumping into Kim Jong-un. Well, again, I think now there's the trading. I think Russia is trading freely. They were actually following the sanctions, UN sanctions, but I think now they don't care anymore. So there's serious trade between Russia and North Korea. I don't know about the weapons. Those weapons talk. I'm not sure.
I'll just say real quick, if you actually read this BBC article, it's all according to a U.S. official who they don't even name the U.S. official. So it's nonsense. And let's just say North Korea and Russia were trading weapons. Who cares? Look at the United States working with South Korea to pump weapons into Ukraine. So how is that okay? But Russia and North Korea trading weapons, that's not okay. What? I don't understand where the problem is, except that the U.S. is always right no matter what it does, and everyone else is always wrong, even if they're doing the exact same thing the U.S. is doing. And if you think about it, it would make sense for Russia into one degree or another, do something like this with North Korea. Again, we don't know if this is happening or not, but it would make sense because the U.S. is working with South Korea. And so a great way to repay South Korea for that is to trade weapons with North Korea, maybe some of their mass-produced munitions in exchange for air defense systems or something like that, and have that sitting on the other side of the demilitarized zone, opposite all of these U.S. bases. And I think what the United States is going to find is that, first of all, a lot of this narrative about Russia going to Iran or North Korea is because Russia is running out of weapons. But just think about that whole conversation, how that went hand in hand with Russia running out of missiles, 6 months ago, and they're firing missiles every single night now. Well, maybe we could talk about this drone campaign by Ukraine in Russia, but the U.S. is just trying to find any button they can to push. So if they can make North Korea look like a big threat and link it somehow with Russia and then also with China, this is a one big narrative they can go all around Asia with to pressure everyone there to back the U.S., to open up their territory for U.S. bases, to buy U.S. weapons, and it just goes on and on and on. This is what the U.S. has been doing for decades.
I mean, how effective are these? First of all, these drones psychologically, are they? Is that the whole purpose, that Ukraine and its allies are launching these drones into Russia to try to make the country unstable? Is that the purpose? Because I mean, they haven't been incredibly successful with it. I mean, what's the strategy behind this?
Well, that is the intended purpose, but more than anything, it's to relay to the Ukrainian public that Russia can hit us, but we can hit them back, even if it's completely ineffective. It's actually galvanizing the Russian people around Moscow and in support of the special military operation. They carry out these attacks every once in a while. They'll blow up a transport plane or something like that. But when you look at the scale of the Russian military and their annual military industrial output, they're not even coming close to undermining the combat power of Russia. So it's not strategic. It has to be psychological. It's not working on the Russian people. So who's left for it to work on? Maybe Ukrainians see this and it makes them excited. You can see on Twitter the pro-Ukrainian commentary community or parallel universe. They get excited about it. It makes them very happy because it's a distraction away from the catastrophic failure that is the ongoing Ukrainian offensive.
Another thing, go ahead, Angelo, if you wanted to add in on that.
It's exactly a distraction. When you look at the damage it's doing, I've seen a few windows here and there being broken in Russia, but there's no really strategic achievement there, and they're actually touching civilians. Again, if you really look, the targets, it's very rare that they have a target within Russia which is linked to the military. I see it. Pandora Papers. Actually, it's interesting that you bring this up, because who is in the Pandora paper is the Gabon president and the new general that did the coup. It's very interesting. And the general, which is actually is a distant family of Ali Bongo, and it's interesting. I have the impression that when you look at this Pandora paper, who are in those papers, you have actually Zelensky, you have his sponsor Kolomoisky, is a person that actually stole $5.5 billion to private bank, a bank called Private Bank, and then you have some personality that it gives me the impression that those ones are people that they own, basically they control. So they issue those papers like the Pandora paper, and they say, well, you know what, we control you. If you don't obey us, well, we have those papers, and maybe we can prosecute you.
Now, just to give the audience a little bit of an understanding what the Pandora Papers are, a company in Panama many years ago had a rogue employee, and this rogue employee basically downloaded the entire database of these companies. Now, Mossack is a company in Panama that it basically they're off the shelf. Let me just if you wanted to get a company and you needed a company quickly. Well, this company called Mossack Fonseca, I believe, I think that I said that correctly. They would, for a small nominal fee, form the company. Now, whether it's in the British Virgin Islands or most of these offshore destinations, Turks and Caicos, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, San Marino, Bahamas, you name them. If they're offshore, they would do it for a small nominal fee. And then what they would do is the second phase of it is once they have that company formed, back then, before all hell broke loose on this, then you would have either a trust. Now, a trust could be operated out of the Channel Islands or Guernsey or Jersey or Isle of Man. Now, this trust agency would then go in front. So they'd be the fronters. So now you have Mossack that's formed the corporation or the incorporation in an offshore entity. And the deal is to try to hide this money and make it complex as possible for regular authorities to have a tough time. For example, if the Americans wanted to go to, I don't know, the Bahamas, they would see a company ABC formatted in the Bahamas. Well, was it made in the Bahamas or was it done by Mossack? Well, so now you start to see the trail where it takes tax authorities endless amount of time to try to follow the money. It's very complicated. So they would go to Mossack. Well, Mossack is basically, a couple offices sitting in Panama. They would call up Mossack. Mossack would say, get a warrant. Well, U.S. warrants don't work in Panama. Get a warrant in a court from a judge. Well, what's it based on? Here's the interesting thing. If you try to base it on tax fraud, some of these countries don't have taxes. For example, the Channel Islands. For example, Monaco. There's no tax code. So you can't charge or use that as an excuse to pull up financial information. You need to show proceeds of crime or fraud. Well, without an arrest warrant, it's difficult. So then you go on to phase two, the trust agency. The trust agency is done by a board of directors at a trust. They say, well, we'll stand in front, we'll be the trust. So you have a second layer now. The first layer is the company based in Panama, which does the outsourcing to buy a corporation, very cheap, $100, $200, and you get a name. The name then it falls back on the trust. The trust puts up the directors, the accountants, all that. So now the hidden beneficial owner is deep down into the files. Okay, so you got 2 or 3 layers to try to protect this fraud that's happening. So this continued on, and then it comes down to who is the ultimate beneficial owner. Well, most of the ultimate beneficial owners of these companies sign a contractual agreement that gives the trust fund the sole direction of the company. So in one sense, we have a piece of paper to say, I own it, but I'm only going to bring out that piece of paper if something really happens. So in fact, that word trust, actually what it means, trust. You trust us with protecting your money. If all hell breaks loose, we'll protect your ass. Now, this is what's happened in the Panama Papers. This unraveled everything. Zelensky's name was everywhere on this, okay? His bankers involved. His bankers that took billions of dollars, this went through it. And this is free stuff to find, everyone. You go on there. Have a look here. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his partners in comedy productions owned a network of offshore companies related to their businesses based in the British Virgin Islands, tax haven, Cyprus, tax haven, and Belize, tax haven. Well, good luck getting somebody on the phone from the Belize to give you financial information. And then what's all behind these corporations are the banks. And the banks say, okay, who's opening up the bank account? Where's the money coming from? So for most of the time, these guys can pretty much get away with anything. And it's still continuing to happen. And you can see here, then it says offshore companies were used by Sheffer and other business partners to buy pricey London real estate. And that's all you got to do is you just got to pull the files, see what these guys, how much money is involved here. We are talking, as Angelo said at the start of this, trillions of dollars that is just vaporized and vanished. I mean, this is where I really get interested in on where and how much of this money is really going into weaponry and how much of it's really sitting in offshore bank accounts ready for these boys. And don't misunderstand me here. I'm not trying to say that, it's only Ukraine involved in this, but I used to live in Monaco. And I got a phone call from a few of my friends about a year ago. Monaco is a small principality between Italy and France in the south of France area. It's about 35,000 people live only there. It's a tax haven. There's no income tax. There's no corporation tax. There's nothing down there. And he said in the last 3 years, he's seen so many Ukrainian luxury cars driving around the Principality of Monaco. You can't hide in Monaco with a car. It's impossible. It's 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. It's not Morocco. It's Monaco that has the Grand Prix every year. And the newspaper from and an investigative newspaper from the Ukraine went there. They called it the Monaco Battalion, is what they nicknamed these guys. And they found that there was yachts, Bugattis, you name it, with Ukrainian license plates around. They exposed it to the tax department in Ukraine. And who got arrested? The reporters. That, to me, is where we're really going with all this stuff. And it's pretty heavy duty when you think about it. It's blatantly right there in our face. And Angelo, I mean, you know about these Panama Papers, right?
Yeah, what is your thought? Because we need to analyze who did this paper. This organization is called OCCRP, and I think maybe Brian, you know more. I mean, for me, this is probably a CIA outlet. So
absolutely,
my question is, you are a CIA outlet and you leak those information. What is the purpose of leaking those information? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear from you guys.
Well, the Panama Papers, the way it seemed to me was the West was trying to do their own version of WikiLeaks or something like that, and I forget whether it was Angelo or Alex, but what have you just said, that this was a way of extorting people that are operating as your proxy? You have all of this dirt on them. And they do the same thing with these human rights organizations. Say for Saudi Arabia, they have a file from the floor to the moon about human rights violations. You nailed it, Brian.
You've nailed it. You've nailed it. You nailed it. This is exactly what is going on here.
But the same, I think there's 2 ways. One is the corruption, and one is sex. Epstein Island, this island up north, that where they were taking care of minors.
Because guys,
who was going there? You look at the list. Why you had Iraq? Yeah, politicians.
Right, Angelo, there's layers here in this whole financial system, how it works. The company formation, the trust company, the beneficial owner, the directors that stand in front. And as Brian, you just nailed this out of the park exactly on what this is this exposed everything, a lot. And now there's a lot of stuff out there. Now, hardly anyone has been prosecuted. This information is public. Hardly any of these tax authorities have charged anyone for tax evasion tax evasion. Sorry. So, when this came out, people looked for their names on there. So, okay, there's my name, but it's under a trust. So I know that guy should vouch for me. All this does is it gives the company info. Now, what are the bank accounts attached to this? Who are on the bank accounts? Where's the money coming from? The Americans and all these other people, they could really, if they wanted to, forensic accountants could have a field day here. But They seem to only be using drip feeding this information, as you say, like the NGOs and all these other organizations. This is a drip feed where they got the dirt. Oh, they got the dirt. They got the dirt on all the big money. And right now, it's kind of like, okay, who do we need to follow our orders? If not, they go to jail. And just recently, I think they've pulled that move on one of the, he's one of the richest guys in Ukraine.
Kolomoisky.
Yeah, so
Igor Kolomoisky.
He's in jail in the Ukraine, or what's the latest?
I think he got detained. I don't know if he's still in jail or what's going on with him. But it was, it's very strange because he was central. He was a central player from 2014 onward, funding the militias, maneuvering people like Zelensky into political power. And now suddenly, he's gone. And I don't know if you saw the live stream with Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mikuris, but they both brought up a very interesting possibility that, maybe the U.S. needs to tighten control over Ukraine, and they want to eliminate people who have money and power who could push back if a decision was made that they didn't necessarily agree with. They have Zelensky's name connected to the Panama Papers, and they're just saying, hey, look, if you're thinking about surrendering or signing a deal with Russia or anything that we don't tell you to do, we're just going to run with all of this. And that's going to be all those mansions and homes that you were buying all around the world. You're not ever going to see those. And so it's a good motivation to keep these people in line.
Yeah, I mean, it's all down to money at the end of the day here. Gentlemen, and I want to tell the viewers of today's program, please subscribe to Angelo's channel. He has been getting more active here on YouTube lately, so make sure to subscribe to his channel, and of course to Brian, the new Atlas, as well as I believe Danny Haipong has joined the chat. I think he's out there. I just wanted to say to everybody, if you want to continue to watch some more geopolitical chat and talk after the show, that you head over to his channel. I will bring up, I think I've got it here. Yes, here we go here. You guys can visit Danny Haipong's channel as well. There it is there. The new Atlas. Sorry, that's you, Brian. Let me just take that off so you guys can see Danny's channel. Brian, I mean, do you think at the end of the day here that this tactic is going to work with, holding these? I mean, it's like they're eating themselves from within. I mean, it's pretty creepy.
What
was that guy doing back? Why did he go back to the Ukraine? Wasn't he in Switzerland?
Well, where could he go? Where could he go? I mean, anywhere he goes in the West, they could do anything they want to him. So maybe he figured, well, at least in Ukraine, I have home field advantage. And this is the problem with doing business with the United States. People who do this are not the smartest people. They're weak. This is why they seek U.S. help politically in the first place. And they get deeper and deeper into this to where they cannot get out. They paint themselves into these corners. And when it does come time for someone to face consequences for all of this, Washington isn't going to pay for any of this. Their proxies will. They will always serve up their proxies before they themselves pay. So, for Zelensky, for Kolomoisky, for all of these people in Ukraine that decided to do business with the United States, after watching the U.S. destroy one proxy after the other, why they themselves thought that they were an exception is beyond me. But they did, and now they're learning the hard way that they're not an exception. They're just the next in a very long line.
Gentlemen, last slide I want to bring up here. This is the top 10 countries with the highest defense budget in 2023. Anything look out of the ordinary here, or does this look pretty much status quo? U.S. with 857, China 230. I mean, Brian and Angela, maybe you can help me with this. China has been investing in its military, but it hasn't had to use any of its hardware in like what 50 years. I mean, that's obviously when we look at military budgets and we think, well, if compared to the U.S., they spend 857, 4 times the amount of China. But then again, China's hasn't have to use a lot of that weaponry. They must have massive stockpiles. You know, they're very committed here to being able to solve anything, whether it's food all the way to warheads. I mean, guys, anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd like to say, well, there's one thing. If you look at the percentage of spending in defense, China does much less in percentage of its GDP. Then we should actually readjust into purchasing power parity. So the expenses what China is spending is much higher, and then because there's so much corruption, waste, and actually depleting of weapons on the side of the U.S., I would say probably. I mean, Chinese army is probably way more efficient. And also, Chinese army has been trained to a single war, the same as the Russian actually. Russia has been trained for a single type of war, same as China. China is being prepared for going to confrontation in the South China Sea, only that single war. While the U.S. has been fighting many wars, and it's not, it could, if you train for many battles, it's different than if you train all your life for a single battle. So there's strong focus when it comes to China. So I would say probably Chinese army might be more efficient, probably.
Well, I'll just add to what Angelo said, and Angelo, you were talking about the inflated healthcare in the United States. We've often talked about GDP, how the GDP of the U.S. is also inflated compared to other countries. On my live stream with the Duran, we were talking about the inflated sense of industrial production in the West because they go by value, not by volume. And it's the exact same with military budget. So the United States has this huge budget, but how much of that is actually being invested in military capabilities versus waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, essentially, overpriced weapon systems. And as Angelo was pointing out, the United States over the last decade, or actually 2 or 3 decades, they have completely reshaped their military from what it was in the Cold War to what it is now. It's supposed to be this flexible expeditionary force that can go around anywhere at any time and destroy a country in the developing world. They're not prepared for a large-scale, intense, protracted conflict with, say, Russia or China. And as Angelo pointed out, all Russia has done is prepared for this type of warfare. All China has prepared for is defending its sovereignty over Taiwan. And so they have this advantage. And we hear U.S. politicians talking about how big the U.S. defense budget is, but they forget that it's actually tied up and inflated. And it's not actually a real representation of U.S. military power. I think we're seeing that play out in this proxy war in Ukraine. I think we saw it play out in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And we will see it play out if the U.S. decides to provoke a war with China. So I think it is. It's just another one of these inflated metrics that the U.S. likes to point at, and nobody really scratches to see what's under the surface.
Yeah, I have that same feeling too. You know, we had a contractor on the program, I think it was about 6 months ago, and he said that, they would, quote, that we need 500 hammers, but the price of a hammer would be something like $150 when you could go down the street and buy it for $15 or $20, massively inflative budgets and stuff like that. But, that your last point there, Brian, about, this coming to the shores of China, it wouldn't surprise me if this is the direction that they're heading in. But what would you see as a wrap up in Ukraine here? Do you think this is going to continue on right through the winter up to 2024, 2025? Or do you see, quickly this could get resolved before maybe even the American elections? And as well from you, Angelo, I'd like your input on that.
Well, I think that the United States is not going to want to give up its proxy. If it gives up in Ukraine, it essentially has lost to Russia. And if it could not defeat Russia in a proxy war, how are they going to take on China? And so in their minds, this is a prerequisite to actually going on to fight China. And I think they won't be able to win the conflict. They will end up trying to perpetuate it and then also simultaneously provoke a war with China, because the window of opportunity, I think, has already closed. But in their minds, they see it as still closing. They believe they have this opportunity where they still have a powerful economy, a powerful military. Again, looking at those inflated metrics, they think they still have a chance of continuing this proxy war and somehow being successful, and then also fighting China and somehow being successful. And just look at how the poor judgment they've exhibited regarding Ukraine and Russia, and they're going to apply that same flawed logic, poor reasoning, delusion in many ways. They're going to apply that to this upcoming conflict. They themselves are working ceaselessly to provoke with China.
Aren't you, Angelo?
I agree with everything what Brian said. I would say that we need to look at actually the union when it comes to the collective West. I think then they might not be as united, and probably they might split over time. Just because of internal pressure. There might be some regime change. Maybe it could be Germany. AfD is actually what they call the far-right party, is over 30%, which, by the way, they want to ban that party because they want to protect democracy. There's a very interesting sense of democracy there. But I would say that that union might not be as solid. And I think there's a question mark, maybe Trump, maybe. I don't think with Trump much would happen, but maybe Ukraine something might be a bit more flexible, might be open to some kind of compromises. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my side, but let's see. Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think there's a much higher. You see how much they thought that Russia could have go into regime change. I would say there's much higher probability there's some kind of civil war, civil unrest in the US. I just don't know. Just imagine if they really go along with putting Trump into prison. I don't know. It's just madness. It could get really bad. I mean, we saw what happened with the BLM. Black Lives Matters, the riots for 6 months. This could get really bad. And you see, this is the problem of our U.S. politics. It's a mob rule. Whoever wins is going to fight against the other. Now
and reverse policy.
Yeah, exactly. Reverse policy. Imagine if we have contested results on the next election. We have, scenarios could get really bad because they. To give an illusion of democracy, they made sure that you had really two divided camps. But I think they played too much that. I think people there, they have antagonized so much people that if people are, one side will feel they're being stolen an election, this time could get really bad.
Although I would add to that, what do they prefer? They prefer to divide people in this manner and have them fighting each other. And you see how much animosity is building up among all these factions in the US. Among ordinary people, they will never get together on common ground and say, our problem is in Washington and on Wall Street. They will never get together and do that as long as these divisions continue to expand. A lot of it is very deliberate. They create these wedge issues, they divide these groups, and they encourage them to fight with each other, because as long as they're fighting with each other, no matter how out of hand it gets, they're not paying attention to Washington and Wall Street. We see this playing out in the United States. People don't know what's going on in Ukraine. That is a conflict that could trigger World War III. People are not paying attention to that because they're busy fighting over their wedge issues back in the United States. So from my point of view, and I could be wrong, but it seems like a system of control that they've created, and they use these issues, this animosity. Yes, it's violent. Yes, the country is dysfunctional, but it's dysfunctional anyway. It will be dysfunctional anyway. So just adding a little chaos and violence in the streets among ordinary people to the people controlling things, they don't care about any of that. That's not going to affect them, I don't think. But who knows? So we have to wait and see.
If you see below there on the ticker there, that 22 years for in prison there for one of the longest sentence for the January 6th. I mean, wow.
Angela, I mean, there were extremely violent protesters in Hong Kong, and when the government there put them in jail, the United States was screaming murder, saying, "Oh, it's a political prisoner, you can't do that." They were just, exercising their freedoms and their rights. But then look at what's going on with January 6th. You don't have to like or agree with the protesters on January 6th at all to understand that this is blatant hypocrisy, where the U.S. encourages separatism and even terrorism all over the world. And then when there's a rowdy protest back in the U.S., they call it sedition. It was not even close to sedition. I mean, like, do people understand what sedition means and how impossible it was for that group of people to actually engage in real sedition? I don't know.
They didn't even break a single furniture. I mean, they were so respectful. I mean, really, it felt like I like to joke about this, but it felt like a sightseeing in the Capitol. But the problem is that we see more and more weaponizing of justice in the U.S., and that is this is very tricky. Once you start weaponizing justice, and then there's no, what they claim, the rule of law. There's no rule of law because very often you have politicians that appoint judges, and those judges are not working for the interest of American people. The whole justice system is completely flawed. I mean, and this is the reason you have so in the U.S. 4% of the world population, you have 25% of the incarcerated population in the world. That is a police state. That is the definition of police state. It's right there. Plus a justice system which is completely corrupt. Why do you have Epstein? All those people that we know they were abusing kids are out there. They're untouchable. And why do you have renamed the corruption? You've renamed it lobby. Because you have the law on your side. You control the law. If the law is not according to what you want, you are going to change it according. So you have Hunter Biden. How many proofs do you need for Hunter Biden? Everything is out there. And keep in mind that what happened with Hunter Biden is linked to the war in Ukraine. Imagine how much blood this family has in their hands.
I put this little tab up here just for everybody to watch. One, the Russian-Ukraine the conflict ends this year. If you press 1. Press 2 if you think it's going to end in 2024, or 3 if you think NATO countries are going to get involved with no end in sight. So 1, the conflict ends this year before, I guess, December 31st, the New Year's Eve bell, or in 2024 sometime, or 3 NATO countries get involved with no end in sight. So yeah, curious. Keep an eye on the the chatter there, but yeah, I agree with you guys. I mean, it's a pretty crazy country though, where you could, 22 years. Did this guy?
That's insane. Yeah, that's completely insane.
But was he attached? Did somebody I know that there was a police officer that had a heart attack there, but what was the charge of this guy? 22 years. Let me pull this up. Let me have a look here. 22 years, Capitol riot. I mean, yeah, they just say jailed for 22 years, going directly to prison. Jesus, I mean, that's it's the longest sentence handed down so far, which happened as lawmakers were certifying President Joe Biden. He was 38 years old, was not in Washington during the riot, but helped organize the far-right group involvement. So he wasn't even there. Not condoning violence.
And who knows what these right-wing groups, the left-wing groups, do people remember Occupy Wall Street and how that seemed to be legitimate in the beginning, and then they had these, they had people come in and infiltrate all of these groups, run them around in circles, run them into each other, and then disrupt the entire movement. They do this all the time, where police infiltrate these groups. Half the time, the worst terrorist organizations in the U.S., the worst far-right organizations in the U.S. are basically FBI projects. And when you see the FBI talking about, we foiled this terror attack, and then you actually read the affidavit, it was the FBI from A to Z organizing the entire thing. They find some person, usually a vulnerable person that's not altogether there mentally, and they run them through the whole operation. At the very last minute, they bust them and they say, look, we stopped this terrorist attack that would never have existed in the first place if the FBI didn't drum it up in the first place.
Now, I'm not condoning violence, but I got to read some of this because this is crazy. So this guy was 39. He wasn't in Washington during the riots, but helped organize it. So for all those that think that your data is not being viewed by the authorities in your country, I can guarantee you very well that all the FBI or the CIA or whoever, National Security Administration, has all this data, whether they're WhatsApp conversations or whatever. But it says the Department of Justice sprawling investigation into the riot has so far seen more than 1,100 people arrested. The rioters turned out in support of Trump, who continues to deny. Okay, he has promised to pardon most of all of the rioters if he's reelected in 2024. There it is, Brian. It was convicted in May of seditious conspiracy. That word there is something that I always am very curious of. This word conspiracy. If you see a lot of it, you'll see a lot of that word. Conspiracy to commit, or conspiracy to commit mail fraud, or conspiracy to money launder. Doesn't mean you did it, but if they can prove that you thought about it or you were thinking about doing it, well, 22 years in the slammer for you. And some of these charges for conspiracy, like money laundering and conspiracy mail fraud, some of these come with 20 to 30 years. They said in their sentencing recommendation, prosecutors described him as naturally charismatic leader, a savvy propagandist whose primary organizer of the conspiracy, there's that word again, he and his co-defendants were convicted of. They also condoned and promoted violence from others, of course. He was a general rather than a soldier, the prosecutors wrote. I mean, I don't even know why they would even say that. But
he was a police informant, this guy. I mean, this is what is insane about this. The U.S. actually is funding and organizing real sedition with these opposition groups in China, here in Thailand, elsewhere around the world. And if any of these governments even dare to try to stop literal sedition that could lead to violence and death, the U.S. and their human rights racket will come out and say this is political persecution, this is human rights abuse. But then in the U.S., they're doing this. And what I would suggest to countries around the world, look at this and use this, cite this example and say, look, the U.S. is cleaning house. Let us clean house. And let's get all these NED-funded organizations, all of these agitators. Let's do the same thing. I mean, if the global leader in democracy and human rights and freedom sees this as a fit punishment. Why can't we do this?
I mean, his lawyer said that his client was a keyboard ninja, a misguided patriot, okay, who tended to talk trash but had no intentions of overthrowing. I mean, I'm going to spend some time to read the court documents to really see what they had on this guy. Prosecutors had called his action a calculated act of terrorism, meriting a sentence of 33 years in prison. The defense wanted no more than 15 years. He stood silently while the judge handed down the penalty. As he was led from the court, he waved to his family goodbye, and his lawyer said he plans to appeal. Other guys received, 10, 15 years, 17 years. Wow.
And again, this guy was the leader of the Proud Boys group or whatever that is. And I don't really follow U.S. domestic insanity anymore. But if you look up this guy's name and type in informant, there's all of these news articles about how for many years he was an informant for federal and local law enforcement. And now it just seems very suspicious. And, you're looking at this. Do you think this is going to stir up the divisions in the U.S. that serve to distract the American people away from what's going on in Washington and Wall Street? Or do you think this is smoothing things over? And it looks almost deliberate, just like this whole business with Trump. It's very deliberate. It's so polarizing. It's the perfect way to keep people distracted and fighting each other rather than coming together on some sort of common ground to fix the many things that are wrong with the U.S.
I agree. None of this panel condones violence. I mean, we've seen a fair enough of it happen in Hong Kong and stuff. But I just seen that some of these sentencing guidelines in the United States just have no reality to them. That's my issue with this person. I mean, you read the headline, automatically you assume that he was the ringleader down there, driving trucks over people and all. You would think that's, a shocking headline. But then you dig deeper into this story. The guy wasn't even there, first of all. And 22 years. I mean, I understand there's rules, regulations, laws, but I mean, 22 years? I mean, the sentencing guidelines in some of these American states, as somebody put it, that's the fall guy for sure. He's the fall guy. I mean, that's 22 years. I think that's one way of stopping it.
Well, if you're in America, if you're an American, be smarter about the way you pursue your activism, because what that guy was doing, what he was a part of, is part of the problem. It's not sorting anything out. It's not going to fix anything. It's just going to polarize people. And you have people on the left who are just as bad, who whatever it is that they do just polarizes people more so, divide people more so. And the problem with Americans is that the education system is so poor. People are so ill-informed on how a functioning society actually works because they don't have an example to look at, because the U.S. is not a functioning society, and so they don't have a roadmap or a list of actual real-world demands to improve the country, because they don't even understand the nature of what is wrong with it in the first place. And so they are fighting each other, sometimes trying to kill each other over these wedge issues, which have nothing to do with the actual problems the U.S. has and the things that need to be done to fix it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in jail in the United States. I think last time I checked, 2.5 million people. It's the most incarcerated country in the world. I think it's 1 in 4 have either been criminally charged or at least arrested in their life. That's almost 20 to 25% of the population. This is a country that has no problems keeping Guantanamo Bay open 22 decades later. And I mean, my whole issue with this is we saw what happened in Hong Kong. And unless you guys watch other TV stations from North America when this was happening, was there something that I missed? I don't think you can even remotely even compare this on a scale of what was happening in Hong Kong here. I mean, they ripped this. Well, Angelo, I don't know if you've seen the Capitol riots, but I don't know. Maybe the audience can tell me, am I missing something? Because I didn't really see bloodshed like I saw in Hong Kong.
Well, it's all about controlling the narrative. If you control the narrative, you can. There's even a technique of positioning the cameras. You see in Hong Kong, if you want, okay, it depends on who you want to demonize. You want to demonize the police, you are going to film the police up front. You want to demonize the protesters, you are going to focus on the protesters. So basically, protesters throwing rocks at the police. So you are focusing on the action, or are you going to focus on the reaction? So when you have police receiving petrol bombs, being beaten up, and so on, well, of course, there's going to be a reaction. But I want to point out one thing which is really important, just factual. There was in Hong Kong, there was 12 months of very, very violent riots. The police didn't even kill one person. In France, the yellow vest riots, many lost an eye, a hand. I think there was over 12 people died. It gives you an idea of the level of violence. I think the Hong Kong police, in this respect, is probably one of the most respectful police in the world. I just want to go back to just what Brian was saying just about the divisions in the US. I think the biggest risk of the system is that people from the bottom, the 99%, they unite and they fight the 1%, and that is the biggest fear. And I like to give you an example that happened in the past. Was you had the Black Panthers and you had the equivalent of the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys, like what they called, I don't like the term, but the white trash. I mean the white poor. The people that are, they've been forgotten by globalization, disindustrialization, and they live paycheck to paycheck. They have a miserable life. And basically what they have in common with the poor black, the one that actually rioted in BLM, they are poor. That's what they have in common. So the system has divided them into races. But there's many ways to divide people. You can divide them through races, through values. Are you for or against abortion, and so on and so on? Well, ultimately, if you realize, just think about what average Joe is going through the whole day. Well, average Joe in the US, and I think this is all around the world, you wake up in the morning, is how do I make a living? How do I raise my kids? I mean, practical and tangible things. Do you wake up in the morning, the first thing you think about is abortion? Do you think about sexuality? Do you think about your gender? Do you think about races? You don't. Those are marginal things. Really, those are so marginal. And I think it's, there's racism, of course, but racism happens everywhere. There are stupid people everywhere. But you know what? I think in general, in the US, it's marginal. The problem is not race issue. Problem is the control of 1% over the 99%. And they found the solution is divide and conquer over many, many issues. Many. The purpose to divide completely and to give an illusion of free choice. But ultimately, the way they see people, and I'm serious about this, the way those globalist elites see people is that we are a consumer group and we are slave labor. We're not human beings. But we are going to feed you with whatever we need, so you are going to shut up, right? Sorry for we are going to give you porn, Netflix, Hollywood, drugs, alcohol. We're going to enslave you. Enslave you in the sense that you need 3 jobs to survive. You'll be in a survival mode. And you know what? Thinking will be a luxury because you're in a survival mode. That's what they need. They need to keep you dumb, and they'll give you just a minimum of education because education is a weapon. Keep you ignorance, same. So what the biggest fear that those globalist elites have is that people realize that, because this is what a lot, like the communists or not, but you look at what the USSR and China, what they did was really thinking in terms of education, brain. We are going to pull those brains together and build up a society. Of course, it didn't work, but for X reasons. But I'm not ideology driven here. It's not about ideology. Actually, whenever someone goes into the trap of ideology, you put yourself into a box. You say, I'm a socialist, I'm a far righter. The minute you do that, you put yourself into a box, and you separate yourself from the rest. While in reality, don't refuse labels. Refuse them. People are going to give you a label. Refuse. The fight is the 99% against the 1%. It's not the left against the right. It's the bottom against the people that are up there. Because the people that are up there, you know what? They see us so divided. They smile. They're like, oh my God. They are so dumb. The system is working, you see? It's been working for thousands of years. We'll keep on dividing them.
That's incredible. Gentlemen, I'll give you a minute and then we'll wrap up the show. Brian, maybe you could tell us what you're up to this week with your audience and how everyone can find you as well. That would be great. And we'll go to Angelo and I'll wrap up the show.
Well, I right after this show, I'm going to post a video that I was working on, an update about the conflict in Ukraine. And then on Friday, I do believe Danny Haifang will be joining me for my live stream. I think Angelo, if he's available, will also be there. So tune in for that. If you want to find and follow my work, just go to YouTube, type in The New Atlas. And in the video description of each video is all the other places you can find and follow my work. And I just want to thank Alex for organizing this, inviting me on. Again, it's always a pleasure. And always nice to share the screen with Angelo, who's actually my co-host for my live streams whenever he's available. And he's actually the one that got me into doing videos in the first place. So people can thank him for that.
Angelo, over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, the same. I return the compliment to Brian. I think we pushed each other. I mean, basically, Brian is an inspiration. And it's also sometimes, I think at some point we were kind of alone. Sometimes we go through this process of we want to tell the truth. It's as a human being, it's a responsibility. And I think it's related maybe to age, this sense of a responsibility towards society. So we have to speak up. And I think we are somehow like mutual support. We realize that we are not alone and more people are joining in. But again, it's not about, I think it's not about pretending to be, I'm not a scholar. I don't have a PhD in geopolitics. And I think what I want to do and what I want to convey through my YouTube channels that you can check on the comments is I want to start really philosophically from the human being. Because ultimately, if you take a macro, we can be macro really at the individual level. It's important to have the two sides and really making people realize that this ultimately we are all human beings. What we are seeking is exactly the same thing. Always, it doesn't matter. People are complex, cultures are complex, and sometimes it's really hard because we have lenses. But ultimately, if you scratch down, we are all the same. But they don't want us to be the same. And that's what I try to convey, and I'll be more active on my YouTube channels in the next few months.
Well, thank you for that, Angelo. Where can we find you? You're on Twitter as well.
Twitter, yes. You can Google. You can check Angelo Giuliano, and the channel Angelo Giuliano also channels on YouTube, which I'm starting to grow.
What's your latest video anyway, so we can check it out? You had a brief, you had a live chat on there as well.
Oh, I did actually. I was inspired the other day. I maybe I was just on my own. I had one beer before, and I was like, you know what? Let's get out of the comfort zone. So I did a video about just casual talk, so people can check my latest latest video I did on live on my channel.
I appreciate that, and I think you got probably some new gear coming too, huh? You're going to get out there and make some videos coming up.
No publicity. It's right there. Just bought it.
Fantastic, everyone. I'm going to put the gentleman backstage. I'll talk to you guys in a moment. Everybody, thanks again for joining tonight's program. I'm Alex with Reporterfy Media, and as well as thanks to the iChungching team for supporting and being behind these live streams. We'll give you a little bit to view on the lovely city of Chongqing. You guys take care. Have yourself a great night. We'll talk to you guys soon.